Chapter 130. Brother Lu, what is blue butterfly do? EXIN looked at Lu Chun and asked in confusion. I've never heard of it before. Is it a rare, mystical material? Lu Chen's pupils shrank slightly. After a moment, he took a deep breath and his expression returned to normal. He smiled and said, "Oh, that's not a mystical material. It's just a kind of fine wine. It's not worth much." "It's wine." EXIN shrugged. It was obvious that she had no interest in things like wine. She bid farewell to Lu Chun and turned to leave. However, at this moment, Lu Chun called out to her. EXIN said, "Brother Lu, is there anything else?" Lu Chun was silent for a moment and said, "EXIN, you have to be careful in your daily life. Don't trust others too easily." EXIN was a little surprised and said, "Brother Lu, what do you mean? Is there something wrong with the person who asked me to pass on the message?" "That's not it." Lu Chun shook his head and seemed to smile bitterly. He then coughed and changed the topic, saying, "There are too many bad people in this world. You're young and you look a little silly. I'm afraid you'll be taken advantage of." "Hey, who's silly, who's silly?" As expected, the EXIN was immediately led astray by his words. She started to shout and huff. Lu Chun nodded with a smile and said, "Anyway, that's roughly what I meant." "Oh, right, he Chong Shang from before. Stay away from him if you don't have anything to do. If he really attacks me like a mad dog and injures you by accident, it'll be terrible." EXIN nodded and said, "I know. Don't worry." She turned and left. Her footsteps were light, and she seemed to be in a good mood. Lu Chun stood behind her, looking at her receding figure. He stood silently for a moment, turned around, and suddenly scolded in a low voice, "Damn fatty, what are you trying to do?" At the foot of the Dog Head Mountain, Atsu trotted all the way over. It had been many days since the earthquake. Many of the celestial birds and beasts that had fled here on that day had unknowingly returned, and once again occupied their orderly positions on the strange mountaintop. When Atsu walked over, many animals saw him. The birds chirped, the ferocious beasts roared, and an ostrich accidentally kicked Atsu's butt as it passed by. There were even more exotic beasts who remembered how pathetic Atsu looked when he was thrown off the mountain peak. They all looked at Atsu with disdain and schadenfreude as he carefully walked up Doghead Mountain. The huge figure was still shrouding the top of the mountain. Rhinoceroses, fierce tigers, lions, giant elephants, and red-crowned cranes danced in the air. There were even more exotic birds and beasts that Atsu had never seen or heard of before. It was unknown how so many of them had gathered in Kunlun Mountain. Among them, there were quite a few ferocious beasts. When Atsu passed through their territory, they either provoked, obstructed, or intimidated him, causing Atsu to look back at every step for fear that he would accidentally become food in the stomachs of others. With great difficulty, Atsu slowly climbed to the top of the Doghead Mountain. The journey was really exhausting. Atsu was so tired that he was half hanging out his tongue and panting. After resting for a while, he looked back and saw a huge oxen lying on the top of the mountain. Its eyes were half closed, as if it was dozing off. Atsu waited for a moment, and then he started to stride towards the green ox. At the same time, the entire mountain was deathly silent. The gazes of countless immortal beasts were looking towards the peak of the mountain, and they were waiting for the next shadow to be tossed down. Atsu wagged its tail and slowly walked to the side of Oxen, which was like a small mountain. It still seemed to be a little cautious, and in the silent atmosphere of the mountain, it seemed to be a little nervous. "Woof!" Atsu's bark was a little low, and there was some hesitation in it. It was more like a question. At this moment, a black figure suddenly swept across the sky. It was the thick and abnormally agile tail of Oxen. Immediately, all the beasts on the Dog Head Mountain became excited. Lions and tigers raised their heads, and celestial birds spread their wings. All of them widened their eyes and stared at the top of the mountain. After a while, the tail gently fell and stroked the soft fur on the back of the black dog in front of Oxen. It patted it and then retracted it. Oxen opened and closed its eyes and then yawned. All the beasts on the mountain were dumbfounded. Atsu was stunned for a while, then suddenly jumped up and ran to the top of the mountain. It shook its body fiercely at all the beasts on the bottom of the Doghead Mountain, and then cried out in joy, "Woof, woof, woof, woof. Woof, woof, woof." Everyone on the top of the mountain was silent. Only the mountain breeze blew past, and the black dog stood on the top of the mountain, looking particularly awe-inspiring. At noon, Lu Chun found an excuse to go down the mountain and went to Kunwa City. Passing through the bustling long street, he seemed to turn a blind eye to the liveliness around him and went straight to the city wall. However, this day, he didn't directly enter the city wall. Instead, he circled the street outside the alley twice and waited for another hour before he entered the alley and arrived at the Black Hill Pavilion that was completely deserted. The fat old ma was lying on his beloved recliner drowsily. When he heard footsteps, he jumped up and said without opening his eyes, "Sir, look around. Our store has a lot of spiritual materials, and the price is cheap." "Oh, it's you." Lu Chun looked at him and said with a sneer, "It's me. Why do you look like you've seen a ghost?" Old Ma let out a big yawn and sighed. "I thought there was finally business coming to my door." Lu Chun spat and said, "Dream on. Since this store opened, how many business deals have you made? Tell me." Old Ma coughed and said with a stern expression, "Let's not talk about the past. We have to look forward. Besides, what's wrong with dreaming? What if it succeeds?" Lu Chun stretched out a finger and gestured at him. Then, his expression slightly darkened. He stared at Old Ma and said, "Tell me clearly, why did you suddenly drag that little girl, Xin, into this?" Old Ma shrugged and said, "I have something urgent to talk to you about, but you just don't go down the mountain recently. Isn't there no other way?" Lu Chun said without any trace of politeness, "Nonsense. You are so well informed and have so many connections. You can investigate whoever you want in the Kunlun party. There are at least dozens of spies in the mountain. Who did you call to tell me that I can't do it? Why did you have to drag an innocent girl into this?" Old Ma looked at Lu Chun and said with a smile, "What's wrong? I've never seen you so concerned about others." Lu Chun snorted and said, "Don't provoke me. We've been playing these things for a long time. I'm just telling you that Xin has nothing to do with this matter. Don't drag her into this." Old Ma looked at him and said indifferently, "Is that what you mean?" Lu Chun seemed to have thought of something. He frowned and said nothing. Old Ma then smiled and said, "Those spies you mentioned are the same as you. If there is any danger, they will also put their lives in my hands. So, if I have to choose someone, of course I will protect my people. That girl from the E family was doomed from the day she met you. Why are you pretending to be stupid? Are you addicted to being Brother Lu in front of her? Do you really think you are a good person who can protect her for a lifetime?" Lu Chun suddenly raised his head and looked at Old Ma with cold eyes. However, Old Ma did not dodge. He just looked at him coldly. The atmosphere in the shop was icy cold. After some time, Lu Chun suddenly said, "You would never talk to me like this normally. What happened?" The fat on Old Ma's face trembled. It seemed as if he was suddenly annoyed. He said angrily, "Nonsense. I've always been this straightforward." Lu Chun did not look at him anymore. He turned to look around the shop and muttered, "There doesn't seem to be any assassins lying in ambush. Maybe they're hiding outside?" After pausing for a moment, he suddenly took a step in front of Old Ma and stretched out his hand to grab the fat on his face. Old Ma cried out and struggled free. "What are you doing?" he asked angrily. "I'm checking to see if you have been forced to eat poison to harm me." "Bah, bah." Old Ma's spittle almost landed on Lu Chun's face. "Go to hell. You are the one who ate poison, the kind that rots your heart, lungs, and intestines." Lu Chun clapped his hands and looked at Old Ma with contempt. "Remember to wash your face more next time. I can't stand a fat man with oily face." Old Ma kicked, but Lu Chun easily dodged it. Old Ma cursed and pointed to the back hall. "Let's go there," he said grumpily. "Why? He wants to see you." Lu Chun suddenly fell silent and looked at Old Ma. The anger on Old Ma's face disappeared at that moment. He looked at Lu Chun with concern. After a while, he sighed and said, "Go." Lu Chun nodded and walked towards the courtyard at the back of the hall. After taking 2 steps, Old Ma suddenly said, "All right, you should tell that Miss E yourself when you get back." Lu Chun stopped and did not look back. "What is it?" Old Ma said indifferently. "The girl is young and naive. She trusts others too easily. I only said a few words, and she believed me. She didn't even think to ask me how I knew about your relationship with her. Lu Chun was silent. After a while, he slowly shook his head. He did not say anything and walked to the back hall. After passing through the long and narrow alley, he saw the familiar square courtyard. However, unlike before, this time, Lu Chun saw the figure of that person at first glance. When that abnormally fat and broad figure sat in the small courtyard, it even gave off the illusion that the courtyard was almost filled to the brim. His loose robe, sitting cross-legged, and shiny bald head all spoke of this person's identity. A bird flew over the courtyard by chance. It seemed to be tired or curious. It slowly fluttered its wings and landed on his bald head. It did not seem to feel any hostility, but it also seemed to feel that it was only a stone under its feet. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked ahead and smiled. He waved at Lu Chun and said gently, "You're here. Come and sit." Chapter 131. Lu Chun took a few steps forward and sat down on the stone steps in the small yard. He was a little far from Perfected Lord Tianlan, but they could still see each other clearly. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him without any anger on his face. His eyes were gentle, and there was even a hint of a smile on his lips, as if he was looking at a stubborn and naughty child. "How have you been?" he asked Lu Chun with a smile. Lu Chun said, "Not bad. Is there any progress on that matter?" Lu Chun glanced at him and said lightly, "Old Ma knows all these things, and he must have told you clearly. Why do you still ask me?" Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "He is not you after all. There might be some differences when he conveys the message in the middle. Besides, I still want to hear you say it again." Lu Chun frowned and said after a moment of silence, "I still don't have any clues. I didn't find any traces of the devil cult's activities on Kunlun Mountain either. I can only slowly investigate it now. I randomly set a few targets and asked Old Ma to investigate them first and see what the results are." Perfected Lord Tianlan nodded with an indifferent expression and said, "I got it, but I'm a little curious about the two people you want to investigate. Why did you choose these two girls instead of others?" Lu Chun said expressionlessly, "There's no reason. I just met them a few times, and it was convenient." Convenient? Even though Perfected Lord Tianlan was experienced and knowledgeable, he couldn't help but smile bitterly at this moment and said, "It seems that those two girls are a little unlucky to know you." Lu Chun looked up slightly and said, "If they are the spies of the devil cult, then they are really unlucky." "All right." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and waved his hand. "Anyway, you just do it. I believe in you." Lu Chun smiled, then glanced at him and said, "Why do you have the time to visit me today? I remember that you have been staying in Zhengxiameng for a while, right?" Perfected Lord Tianlan said, "I've been back for a while now, and I've always wanted to meet you. However, it's really inconvenient on Kunlun. Now that you're at the foot of the mountain, it's rare for you to come down. That's why it's been delayed until today." He smiled and said, "Actually, if you don't come today, I'll be leaving tomorrow." Lu Chun was startled for a moment, then said, "No wonder Old Ma was so anxious." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled without saying anything. Lu Chun frowned and suddenly said, "You've been back for a while, and you came back secretly without anyone in the sect knowing?" His eyes suddenly brightened and sharpened as he looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan. "Did something happen in the sect? Something came up. What is it? It's not convenient for me to tell you." Lu Chun's eyes flashed, and he looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan. "Oh, you can't even tell me." Perfected Lord Tianlan thought for a while, and then shook his head. "It's still hard to say. However, I might be able to tell you when you're done with this, and I take you in as a disciple." Lu Chun looked at Perfected Lord Tianlan, and the light in his eyes grew brighter. He suddenly stood up and said, "Seems like it's a big matter." "Yes, it's a big matter. And it's a big secret of the Kunlun party." "I think so." Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "Why? Are you very curious and want to know?" "Yes." Lu Chun answered crisply. "What secret is there in the Kunlun party that the fiend cult coveted it so much that they even bet the fate of the entire sect on it? There must be something behind it." It might be helpful in finding the fiend cult spy. I want to know. Perfected Lord Tianlan was silent for a moment, as though he was weighing the pros and cons in his heart. Then, he smiled apologetically and said, I'm sorry, I still can't tell you. However, I can tell you that only Senior Brother by Chun and I participated in that matter. I believe it has nothing to do with the fiend cult spy that you mentioned. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly. After a while, he shook his head slowly and said, You two perfected lords are highly respected. It's naturally impossible for you to collude with the fiend cult. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled without saying anything. He looked at Lu Chun, and a dark light flickered in the depths of his eyes like gentle waves on the ocean. The bird chirped and didn't fly away even after a long time. It seemed to be reluctant to part with perfected Lord Tianlan's huge bald head. It looked around and occasionally pecked at the shiny skull with its beak. However, perfected Lord Tianlan looked calm, as though he did not care about the bird at all and did not feel the pain at all. Is there anything I can help with? Perfected Lord Tianlan asked Lu Chun. Lu Chun asked, You want to help me? Shouldn't I? I was the one who asked you to do this. If there's anything I can help with, I can also do something in passing. There are a few people. Help me kill them, Lu Chun said. Perfected Lord Tianlan said, That's not very good, right? After thinking for a while, he said, Are you sure that those people are suspected to be fiend cult spies? No, I just don't like them. Lu Chun said and then added, Just like you. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled bitterly and sighed. I shouldn't have told you the truth back then. Lu Chun sneered. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him with gentle eyes that still seemed to be doting. However, after a while, he suddenly said, Little Lu, I realize that you're a little different from before. Lu Chun said, What? You don't seem to be afraid of me anymore. Lu Chun sneered and said sarcastically, Look at what you're saying, as if I've been afraid of you for so many years. Didn't I say the same thing to you a few years ago? Perfected Lord Tianlan shook his head with a playful look in his eyes. He looked at Lu Chun and said, That's not it. Back then, even though you were always joking around in front of me, you still had some respect for me. Come on, why would I be afraid of you? You're not afraid of me. You respected the word perfected Lord deep in your heart. At that time, I could tell that you, like almost all the cultivators in the world, had an instinctive fear and admiration for the supreme position of perfected Lord, this realm, and the strength that this title represents. Perfected Lord Tianlan smiled, but his eyes were unusually bright as he looked at Lu Chun. It was as if he could see through his body and see through his organs. That's the supreme realm that billions of cultivators can never reach in their entire lives. For thousands of years, everyone respected it. Everyone is the same. I can tell. Huh? Lu Chun laughed, but there seemed to be a slight change in his expression. Perfected Lord Tianlan looked at him and said slowly, But when we met in the barren valley previously, I felt that something was wrong. However, I couldn't figure it out no matter how I thought about it. His eyes flickered slightly, and he said gently, It was only when I looked at you just now that I suddenly understood what was wrong. The smile on Lu Chen's face suddenly disappeared as he looked at the fat man coldly. Perfected Lord Tianlan pointed at Lu Chun and said calmly, You're not afraid of me anymore. To be exact, you, an ordinary cultivator with such a low cultivation base, actually no longer have that instinctive reverence for the strength of a soul formation perfected Lord. Lu Chun said coldly, I don't understand what you've been talking about. Perfected Lord Tianlan narrowed his eyes and stared at Lu Chun as if he was re-examining him. After a while, he suddenly said, God's subduing mantra, right? Lu Chen's face suddenly turned pale. When Atsu ran out of the forest, it looked at the sky. Although it was still bright, the sun was already setting in the west. It should be evening soon. Today on the Doghead Mountain, it was very happy and excited. It finally blended in with those immortal birds and strange beasts that usually had their eyes on the top of their heads. It made it feel proud and elated. Even its footsteps when it ran back seemed to be lighter than usual. It was a pity that dogs couldn't hum, otherwise Atsu would definitely be whistling all the way back. From afar, It saw Lu Chen's house, and Atsu ran all the way there. However, when it was about 100 feet away, Atsu suddenly stopped. It saw a figure walking back and forth outside the house. It was a man with a strange expression on his face. His face was a little red, and his eyes were a little unfocused. His chest was heaving up and down as if he was gasping for breath. There was also a hand that was hidden in his chest as if he was grabbing something. That person kept looking around, but more often than not, he was staring at Lu Chen's house. He was mumbling something, but it was unclear what he was saying. He just kept pacing around the house. Atsu was a little puzzled and stared at that person for a while. But apart from his suspicious behavior, that person didn't seem to be doing anything else. Atsu waited for a while and saw that the sky seemed to be a little darker. After thinking for a while, it felt that it should go back first. So, it ran towards the house. When it ran past that person, it could see that the man glanced at it, but he didn't seem to care, nor did he do anything else. Atsu was a little relieved. It ran to the door and called twice, but the house was quiet. No one answered. Behind it, the man suddenly stopped and turned around to look at it. Atsu didn't pay attention to the movement behind it. Unfortunately, it found that there was no one at home. But now, this kind of thing was no longer a problem for it. Wagging its tail, Atsu ran to the back of the house. The small dog hole there was now its exclusive passage. But at this moment, suddenly, there was a call from behind it. "Little dog." Atsu's footsteps paused for a moment. It stopped in front of the dog hole and looked back. It saw that it was the strange man from before. He didn't know when he had walked over, but he was standing not far behind it. There was a strange smile on his face, and he smiled at it. His teeth were very white, deathly white. Chapter 132. What does this have to do with the deity vanquishing spell? Lu Chen asked. Perfected Master Tianlan looked at him and shook his head. There are thousands of cultivators in the world. 90% of them are stuck below the Jindan realm for the rest of their lives. Among the rest, less than 10% can break through the Yuanying realm bravely and diligently. As for those in the divine transformation realm, people can only look up to them like gods. Lu Chen smiled and said, "Do you think you're a god?" "Of course I'm not a god. At most, I'm just a fat man with a slightly higher cultivation." Perfected Master Tianlan smiled and said, "But people who haven't reached this realm won't have such thoughts." Lu Chen suddenly shut his mouth. "I've seen many people in this world, but there's only one kind of person who doesn't fear me." "What is it?" Lu Chen couldn't help but ask. "A divine transformation realm perfected master with the same cultivation as me." "You're getting more and more ridiculous." Lu Chen forced a smile and looked down at his body. Then he said, "Divine transformation realm perfected master. Do I look like one?" "Of course not." Perfected Master Tianlan's smile gradually disappeared. Then he looked at him meaningfully and said, "That's why I'm very curious and curious. What is it? Or did you see or encounter something that made you throw away the fear of a divine transformation realm perfected master?" Lu Chen's Adam's apple gently moved up and down. Under perfected Master Tianlan's bright eyes, he suddenly felt a penetrating chill. However, perfected Lord Tianlan quickly continued, "So I thought about it carefully and thought about what you had encountered in the past 10 years. In the end, after thinking about it, I realized that you had stayed in that small mountain village for the past 10 years. Your cultivation had been crippled and you had concealed your identity. There shouldn't have been any accidents. So, the accident happened before you went into seclusion." He stared into Lu Chen's eyes for a long time and said gently, "So, it must be the deity vanquishing spell, right? That secret spell is a secret of the devil cult. Only a few devil cult elders know the trick to it. But according to what happened in the Battle of Barren Valley, and what you mentioned to me a few days ago, I think those people probably wanted to use a secret spell to open the sky and cross the boundary to attract the magnificent divine power to forcefully advance to the next level." Lu Chen said coldly, "They failed. It's because of you that they failed." The atmosphere in the courtyard suddenly turned cold. Lu Chen remained silent, but the breath in his chest seemed to be a little unstable, and even his breathing became a little heavier. However, Supreme Lord Tianlan continued, as if he didn't care about anything. So, I was thinking that something I don't know happened to you when the god vanquishing spell was running. These things are very important. They can even make you throw away your fear of perfected cultivators. Look, yes, it's the look in your eyes. Supreme Lord Tianlan looked into Lu Chen's eyes gently and said, "You clearly know that you are no match for me, and you know that there's a world of difference between your cultivation and mine. But when I exposed the secret in your heart, your first reaction when you looked at me just now was not to find a way out or beg for mercy." The corner of Lu Chen's eyes twitched slightly. He said coldly, "Then what do you think I am doing?" Supreme Lord Tianlan said indifferently, "You are looking at me. When you looked at my body, you were subconsciously examining something, as if you were thinking how to kill this person. Am I right?" Supreme Lord Tianlan asked Lu Chen. The courtyard was silent. After a while, the little bird on the bald head suddenly jumped up and flapped its wings to fly into the sky. The two looked up at the same time and watched the little figure disappear into the distance. After a while, they retracted their gazes and looked at each other again. "This is the funniest joke I have ever heard in my life," Lu Chen said expressionlessly. Supreme Lord Tianlan thought for a while and said, "It is quite funny." After saying that, he actually opened his mouth and laughed 3 times at Lu Chen. Lu Chen lowered his head slightly and then slowly once again sat down on the stone steps. After a while, he suddenly said, "Damn Baldy, if you don't believe me in your heart, then I can't do this anymore." A cold breeze blew through the courtyard and seemed to blow the chill into the depths of one's heart. After a while, Supreme Lord Tianlan shook his head gently and said, "Of course I still believe you, little Lu. Just like what I said to you in the Barren Valley, you are the only person in this world that I trust the most." Lu Chen raised his head and saw that the abnormally tall and sturdy fatty was staring at him with a gentle gaze. "What I said just now wasn't to blame you, nor did I say that you really wanted to kill me. It's just that I really want to know what you saw when you cast the god-subduing incantation that suddenly made you have such a state of mind. All these years, you have never kept any secrets from me. I feel that I know everything about you. But now that something that I actually don't understand has suddenly happened, I really want to know." Supreme Lord Tianlan smiled and said, "I think it's not that hard to say." Lu Chen sat where he was in silence. The surrounding light was faintly dim. After a while, he looked up at the sky and stood up. "It's late. I have to return to the mountain." Supreme Lord Tianlan looked at him quietly. After a while, he nodded and said gently, "Then go. I will return to the Immortal City tomorrow. Be careful here in Kunlun Mountain." Lu Chen nodded at him, and then turned to walk back to the passageway. Supreme Lord Tianlan seemed to sigh softly and closed his eyes. A dim light flickered in the depths of his eyes, and a trace of complicated emotions seemed to flow through them. However, when Lu Chen walked to the entrance of the passageway, he suddenly stopped and did not look back. He just stood where he was and said calmly with an almost emotionless tone, "If I say that I've already told you everything that happened when the god-subduing incantation happened back then, even the smallest details, will you believe me?" Supreme Lord Tianlan opened his eyes and looked at the young man's back. After a while, he said, "I believe you." Lu Chen nodded and then walked out of the courtyard without saying another word. When the sky darkened, Lu Chen returned to his residence on Kunlun Mountain. He walked all the way, expressionlessly pushing open the door and turning back to lock it. When the wall and the door finally completely separated him from the outside world, he stood there quietly. He stood there for a long time. The light and shadow were quietly changing. Darkness gradually filled this place, and his figure also merged into the shadows. No one would see that in his sleeves, under his lapel, there was an extremely subtle and desperately suppressed slight trembling of his hands. It was very quiet in the darkness. There was no light, no wind, and no sound. The darkness was like a surging black tide, surging soundlessly and rolling in front of him like waves. He raised his head in a daze. In the depths of his dark eyes, a black flame suddenly burned. That flame seemed to instantly bring him back to 10 years ago. Boom! That earth-shattering boom, that majestic pillar of light that pierced through the darkness, and that crack that tore through the sky. An unimaginably vast power turned into a dazzling light that shone on the figures of the four people. They let out painful and excited roars of joy. The fire raged, and the strange seed seemed to be reborn, growing, and blooming in the flames. Heaven and earth, God's subduing incantation. The wild power tore apart the earth and sky. Only the dark shadow stood silently. Behind the light, a black dagger was pulled out. The black fire in the depths of the pupils suddenly flourished. It burned crazily, as though it wanted to burn through the traces of time and erase everything. It was a blade that had pierced through time, cutting through flesh and blood, stabbing into the heart. As a result, blood sprayed out like a torrent. The old and distorted, terrified and angry face turned around, staring straight into his eyes. The black fire burned. The soul roared. The dark blade stabbed into the light, and the surging power surged like a tide. It was as if it had finally found a gap in the dam, and with a loud bang, it broke through everything. Thus, the light and darkness merged into one. Thus, all cause and effect turned into fragments, chaotically thrown away in that memory. Like a desolate night rain, it floated down and disappeared. Only that power, that incomparably powerful power, was still clearly engraved in his heart. He lay down on the cold ground in the darkness. Slowly, he opened his eyes again. It was as though he had woken up from the deepest and most difficult nightmare, painfully but firmly. He panted slightly. After a long time, when everything calmed down, he raised his right hand and quietly looked at the outline of the palm in the darkness. That hand had once held a sword, had once killed people, and had once felt that power that fell from the sky in the blood and fire, light and darkness. The people of the world respected the heavens, respected the earth, and respected the gods. That power was like the gods. The four figures in the intersecting light and shadow at the last moment seemed to be as powerful as the gods. The black fire burned in his eyes and slowly extinguished. Finally, everything returned to nothingness. Darkness filled the room. The surroundings were quiet. He lay there quietly. Suddenly, as though he had thought of something, he moved his head and slowly sat up. The surroundings were so quiet. It was as though he was the only person left in the world. At this time, Liu Chan suddenly realized that it had been a while since he had felt this lonely feeling. Every night that should have been a lonely night, every time he woke up in the darkness, he would hear a light and familiar breathing sound, and he would feel a warm and beating body. So it was because of it that he no longer felt lonely. In the darkness, Liu Chan sat for a moment. Then he looked around. The quiet darkness was as still as water. He softly called out, "Atsu." Chapter 133. The darkness was as silent as the sea under the night sky. There was no sound, but it seemed like the undercurrent was surging. The silhouettes in the house were vague, but there was no warmth. Atsu was not in this house. Liu Chun sat silently for a while, then slowly stood up. Darkness surrounded him and rolled around him without a sound. Liu Chun looked around and saw everything that should have been in the house, except for the black dog with a lame hind leg. He was silent, his eyes shining faintly in the darkness. After a while, he walked to the back of the house, squatted down, and saw that the small dog hole that had appeared because of the earthquake was still there. Everything was the same as usual, but Atsu, who would come back to sleep every night, was gone. Liu Chan stared at the dog hole for a moment, then suddenly stood up and strode to the door. With a squeak, the door was pulled open by him. In an instant, the darkness of the night outside the house rushed in like a flood. It was a deep night outside, a night where no light could be seen. The silent, empty land was unusually desolate that night. The cold wind swept past, blowing across his face. There was a trace of coldness that seemed to seep into his flesh. The night was bleak. At dawn the next day, when the first ray of morning light shone into the house through the gap in the window, Liu Chun, who was sitting by the bed, raised his eyes and looked at the ray of dawn. There was a trace of coldness in the warmth of the morning light, as if the chill from last night had not completely dissipated. But after a while, when the sun rose, all the darkness and coldness would disappear. He sat in the house all night, but Atsu still did not come back. Lu Chen's face did not show much fatigue, but his eyes were a little cold. When the sun rose, the Kunlun party seemed to have just woken up from last night's sleep. Many people opened their doors and went out. Lu Chen was among them, beginning a new day. He walked with a calm expression, without anxiety or panic, without exhaustion or impatience. Just like in the past, he quietly walked toward the spiritual field that belonged to him in the flowing fragrance garden. At the entrance of the grass garden, he met many odd job disciples with the same status as him. Everyone was acquainted with each other and greeted him with smiles. Lu Chen did the same. As if nothing had happened, he smiled and nodded at the people around him. Just as he was about to enter the entrance of the grass garden, He Changsheng walked past him and turned his head to look at him. Lu Chen also turned to look at him. Their gazes met, and He Changsheng smiled. He said indifferently and with a hint of alienation, "Morning." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Morning." After exchanging greetings, the two of them parted ways and walked towards their respective spiritual fields. However, after walking a few feet, Lu Chen's footsteps paused. He turned around and looked at Yi Changxing's back as he walked away. He stared deeply at him. The day passed peacefully and peacefully. When dusk came, the odd job disciples in the flowing fragrance garden began to pack their things and prepare to go back. Lu Chen left the spiritual field and walked outside. On the way home, intentionally or unintentionally, he took a longer detour and walked past the spiritual field that was newly assigned to He Changsheng. The spiritual field was empty. He Changsheng, who had always been diligent and willing to work, seemed to have left early on this day. Looking at the empty spiritual field, Lu Chen frowned and then left in silence. On the way back from the meadow garden, he fell behind everyone. The afterglow of the setting sun cast a slanted shadow on the ground. When he could already see his house in the distance, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. He stared at his shadow on the ground for a while, then turned around and walked in another direction. Unlike the living quarters of the odd job disciples on Rock Mountain, the treatment of the odd job disciples in the flowing fragrance garden was much better. It was probably because the odd job disciples who were able to come here were much more useful than ordinary people. Therefore, most of the odd job disciples had their own rooms, and they were not close to each other. Lu Chen did not spend much effort to find He Changxing's residence. When he walked around the house, he knew that there was no one in the house. He Changsheng had not returned yet. He turned his head to look at the setting sun, then walked to the side and sat down under a big tree. Not long after, when the sky gradually darkened, the shadow of the big tree moved over and covered his figure, making it look a little blurry. He waited here for a long time. It was not until the sky turned completely dark and the moon began to rise into the night sky that a figure walked quickly in the distance. That person's pace was not fast, but seemed very relaxed. He was even humming a little song that others could not understand from time to time, as if he was in a very good mood. When he came close, with the help of the light, he could see that this person was He Changsheng. He obviously didn't notice Lu Chen sitting in the shadow of a tree by the side of the road. He just walked on smugly, and just like that, he walked past. And Lu Chen did not open his mouth to stop him. He just silently hid in the dark shadows, looking at He Changxing's back with a cold gaze. The night passed peacefully. Lu Chen lay on his bed, quietly watching the darkness in the house until the sky brightened again. That night, Atsu still did not return. Early in the morning, Lu Chen, like the other odd job disciples, got up, washed up, and went out. His cold expression disappeared the moment he opened the door, and then he warmly greeted the people around him, joked, and walked together to the flowing fragrance garden. At the entrance of the garden, he saw a few people walking in front of him. One of them slowed down, turned around, and greeted Lu Chen and the others with a smile. That was Yi Changsheng. When the sunlight shone on his face, he saw Lu Chen with a smile, and then a concerned smile appeared on his face. He said to Lu Chen with a smile, "Good morning. Hey, why do you look a little haggard? Did you not sleep well last night?" Lu Chun was surprised, turned his head to look at the people around him, and said, "It can't be. Do I not look awake?" The people around him laughed and shook their heads and said, "Not at all. You look very energetic." Lu Chun breathed a sigh of relief and said to He Changshan with a smile, "You scared me. Actually, I slept well last night." The smile on He Changxing's face seemed to freeze for a moment. Then he nodded and said, "That's a good thing." With that, he turned around and walked into the garden. Lu Chun joked with his friends next to him, but his gaze followed He Changxing's back, and in the depths of his eyes, there was a faint flash of a dark flame. It was another normal and peaceful day. At noon, Lu Chun left his own spirit field and walked around the garden. When he passed by He Changxing's spirit field, he found that there was no one there. The spirit herbs in the spirit field looked a little listless, and the weeds at the side were growing a little too vigorously, as if they hadn't been taken care of for a long time. Lu Chun looked at this scene indifferently, and after standing beside the spirit field for a moment, he turned around and left. Everything seemed to be a repeat of yesterday. At dusk, Lu Chun once again came to He Changxing's room, and, after confirming that there was no one in the room, he sat down in the same position as yesterday and began to wait patiently. Night fell, and there were no stars and no moon. This night seemed to be darker than usual. A cold wind blew in the mountains, and it seemed to be a bit chilly. The branches and leaves on the large trees shook, and the dark shadows swayed continuously. He sat in the darkness, as if he had already become one with the shadows. This night, he waited a little longer than the night before, and even when it was almost the midnight of the curfew, he saw He Changxing's figure return from the road in the distance. But today, he seemed to be different from yesterday. He didn't have that kind of light footsteps and happy mood. As He Changxing walked over, he let out a few angry curses from time to time. It was unknown what he was cursing, but he even looked a little flustered and exasperated. When he walked closer, Lu Chun could even see that there were a few more tears on He Changxing's clothes, and there were also some vague dark marks, which looked like bloodstains. "Bastard, bastard, mother of ****, are all bastards." He kept on cursing, and the expression on his face was the same as he gnashed his teeth, as if he wanted to cut someone into 1,000 pieces with a deep hatred. Then, cursing and swearing, he walked back to his room. The night wind blew coldly. The leaves rustled. Lu Chen's gaze seemed to ignite a flame in the shadows, a dark, silent flame. He stared coldly at He Changxing's back, but until he walked back to his room, he still didn't move. After a while, he stood up, turned around, and walked into the deeper darkness, disappearing. This night, the wind was strong and the night was cold. Lu Chun lay on his bed in his room, surrounded by darkness. Even though it was late at night, he did not feel sleepy at all. He opened his eyes and stared at the seemingly endless darkness around him. Beside his hand, the darkness seemed to be particularly thick, as though it were nurturing something strange. It twisted and turned silently, and occasionally a flash of light would flash by, before disappearing in the blink of an eye. In the silence of the night, it was as though there was only loneliness left in the world. At this moment, Lu Chun felt as though he could hear his own heartbeat. It was eerily quiet, until a soft voice suddenly floated over from somewhere in the dark night. It came with the wind. It was soft and soft, almost like a gasp, almost like a soft hum. Little by little, it approached and struggled. In the darkness, Lu Chun suddenly sat up. His eyes shone brightly, and he turned to look at the door. The night wind blew coldly. Somewhere in the darkness outside the door, there was suddenly a soft sound. It sounded like a sigh, and yet it also sounded like a call. It sounded like a strange, spirit, emitting a hair-raising, low cry in the middle of the night. Lu Chun got off the bed, strode to the door, and yanked it open. The darkness surged over like a tidal wave, and it completely swallowed his entire body with the force to topple mountains and overturn seas. Chapter 134. The night wind blew coldly, and the chill of the night seemed to penetrate deep into his bones. Outside the door, under the shadow, a small black shadow was curled up. When it heard the sound of the door opening, it seemed to tremble. Then, it slowly raised its head and looked at Lu Chun, who was standing at the door. The night was deep and boundless, making the whole world seem like it was shrouded in darkness, except for a bit of green light in the shadow. That was Atsu's eye. Lu Chun stood quietly at the door. For a moment, when his eyes met that slightly green eye, he even subconsciously held his breath. He originally thought that he had long been used to the darkness, that he had blended into the shadows in countless dark nights. He originally thought that he had seen a lot of blood, hatred, betrayal, and cruelty. He originally thought that his heart was already as hard as stone. He originally thought that he would no longer feel fragile, touched, sad, and the pain brought by these things. He was wrong. He realized that he was wrong. He slowly squatted down, the muscles in his body tensed up bit by bit, as if this was the only way he could control his body. In front of him, there was a thick smell of blood. He glanced around from the corner of his eyes. On the dark road that he came from, there was a faintly discernible, long line of blood. It was the result of his painful body rubbing against the hard and rough gravel, leaving behind bloodstains. Atsu was lying in front of him. It was awake, but for some reason, it was unusually quiet. Lu Chun silently reached out and stroked its body. Where his hand touched, there was a slightly wet and sticky feeling. His hand froze for a moment. Then he slowly retracted it and placed it in front of his eyes. In the dim light, blood slowly flowed between his fingers and palms, like the sinister smile of a demon in the darkness. Pah! With a soft sound, a spark lit up in Lu Chen's hand, illuminating the place in front of him and illuminating Atsu in the darkness. It was as if time had suddenly reversed on this night, returning to the day when he first met Atsu in the land of chaos. The miserable shadow of the black puppy overlapped with the scene in front of him. Atsu looked very miserable. There were at least dozens of cuts on its body. Blood and flesh covered its back and abdomen. There was almost no intact skin on its body. Only half of its tail was left, and the other half was missing. Its two hind legs were completely limp on the ground, and large patches of white bones were directly exposed. Only its two front legs looked intact, but they were also badly mutilated. It looked like it had climbed back by relying on these two front legs. A piece of its ear was missing, and there were several terrifying scars on its head, as if it had been directly chopped by a sharp blade. On its face, there was a deep scar that slashed diagonally across its left eye, leaving only an empty hole with a trace of blood flowing from it. The green eyes reflected the light of the fire. That was the last eye. A low and soft sound slowly came out from between Lu Chen's teeth. After a moment, he threw away the torch in his hand. The flame was instantly extinguished, and darkness rushed in. He stretched out his hands and gently held Atsu in the darkness. Blood flowed down and dyed his clothes red. The blood, which was no longer very warm, slowly dripped on his skin. He hugged it tightly, bringing it close to his chest. As if it had heard the familiar sound of his heartbeat, Atsu raised its head, its green eyes flashing with a hint of relief, like a sparkling gemstone shining in the night, covering all its pain. It struggled to lift its body, stuck out its tongue, and gently licked Lu Chen's face. Then, its body tilted and sank into the darkness. The night was so long, and it seemed like a sad life would never end. The night wind whistled nonstop, sweeping past the towering mountains and lofty ridges, stirring up the dark clouds in the sky, but it still could not blow away the dense fog in the depths of Kunlun Mountain. A few bolts of lightning flashed through the depths of the clouds, twisting like wild silver snakes. After a moment, there was the rumbling of thunder in the sky. For strange peaks suspended between the clouds were incomparably tall. In the night, they were like four giants standing in four directions, guarding the fog in the depths of Kunlun. On the winter peak, which was like a world of ice and snow, the highest peak was still surrounded by a violent snowstorm. On the cliff below, a skinny old man was standing with his hands behind his back, staring at the darkness below. His bright eyes, which were completely different from his withered aura, seemed to be able to penetrate the darkness and see the depths of the fog there. Not far behind him, White Lotus was standing quietly at the side. In this cold night, for some reason, the incomparably powerful True Lord did not have his two famous disciples by his side, but only this little girl who was just over 10 years old. But it seemed that White Lotus had a cold expression, standing expressionlessly. Other than the respect she had for Hakushin Jinkuin in front of her, no other emotions seemed to exist on her face. For a young girl, this seemed to be an unusual thing. After an unknown period of time, Hakushin Jinkuin turned around and looked at White Lotus. His gaze fell on the white ferret fur on her body, and he smiled and said, "Are you cold?" "Not cold," White Lotus said calmly. Hakushin Jinkuin nodded, and his eyes revealed a trace of gratification. He even sighed slightly and said, "This child, your talent is too good after all. You have only cultivated the snow wind scripture for a short period of time. Although you can't say that you have reached a higher level, but you have already made some small achievements, and you have some resistance to the cold wind and snow." White Lotus shook her head and said, "I am still far from it. Not to mention other things, if I did not have this precious ferret fur coat on me, I am afraid that I would not be able to stand here for so long." Hakushin Jinkuin smiled and said, "Even so, it is already very good. Ordinary people cannot even stay on this winter peak." White Lotus lowered her head and said, "It is all thanks to Master's training." Hakushin Jinkuin turned around and looked at the deep night in the distance, and the tall mountain peaks in the depths of the night. His eyes fell on one of them, and he stared for a long time. Suddenly, he said, "Do you know what is on that mountain?" White Lotus followed his gaze and thought for a while. Then, she said, "That should be the summer peak. It is the place where martial Uncle Tianlan, another perfected lord of Huashan realm in our sect, meditates." Yes. Hakushin Jinkuin looked at the shadow of that tall mountain, and his eyes flickered slightly. After a while, he suddenly smiled and said, "Lianer, your talent is excellent. In the future, as long as you do not go astray, there is no need to say that your future is promising. I am old, and my chi and blood are declining. I don't know how long I can take care of you. If you meet your martial Uncle Tianlan in the future, you must always maintain respect and must not be rude." White Lotus nodded and said, "I understand." She paused and could not help but look a little curious. Then she said, "Master, I have not seen martial Uncle Tianlan since I came up here. What kind of person is he?" There was a flash of brilliance in the depths of Hakushin Jinkuin's eyes. He slowly looked at the dark fog that was like an abyss under his feet. After a while, he suddenly said, "My junior brother is overflowing with talent and bold vision. He is a peerless figure that I have never seen in my life." White Lotus did not seem to expect that her master would have such a high evaluation of the youngest uncle. She was surprised for a moment, and then her eyes showed a yearning look. She thought to herself, to be able to get such an evaluation from a perfected lord of Huashan realm, he must be an unimaginable genius. However, Hakushin Jinkuin smiled and looked at White Lotus with a gentle look in his eyes. He said, "When you grow up, you should be able to understand a truth." "What truth, master?" "No one is perfect." White Lotus secretly glanced at Hakushin Jinkuin and said, "You mean?" Hakushin Jinkuin smiled and reached out to touch her head. He said, "When you grow up, I will tell you a secret, okay?" "Okay." Hakushin Jinkuin laughed and then walked away from the cliff with his hands clasped behind his back. White Lotus sneaked a peek at the darkness at the bottom of the cliff and followed. The soft light shone in the ancient tree hole. The misty green aura wrapped around the tree wall and quietly stared down. Lu Chan brought the dying Atsu here and carefully placed him on the open space beside the puddle. Atsu's injuries were extremely serious, and his body was in a terrible state. He looked even more miserable than when he was in the Demon Flower Valley in the Land of Chaos. Lu Chan looked at its appearance and frowned deeply. His eyes flickered with uncertainty. He reached out and fiddled with the water, only to see that the water was clear and transparent, but it no longer had the magical green vitality from before. He had used up that magical aura. Now, There was only a cluster of strange black fire at the bottom of the puddle. Lu Chun stayed silent beside the puddle for a long time. It was as if he had thought of all the methods, but he still could not find any panacea that could save Atsu's life. It was too seriously injured. For a moment, he raised his head and looked around. This ancient tree hole was full of vitality. The tree walls were mottled, and there were two strange doors hidden in the shadows. Other than that, it was like a strange place that was naturally isolated from the rest of the world. Lu Chun lowered his head and gritted his teeth. He looked at the fallen Atsu at his feet. After a while, he seemed to have made up his mind and let out a long sigh. He flipped his palm, and the incomparably sharp black dagger appeared in his hand. From the side, his face was as cold as an ice-cold rock. Even his eyes had become emotionless. He no longer hesitated, and without any hesitation, he stabbed his wrist with his sword. Blood immediately gushed out and dripped down his wrist. He expressionlessly stretched out a finger and dipped in the blood. He stared at it for a moment before pressing it forward. Chapter 135. When his finger pressed forward, drawing a bright red and dazzling blood mark in the air, deep in Lu Chun's eyes ignited a deep dark flame. In that instant, his entire aura, temperament, and even breathing suddenly changed. An indescribable dark aura spread out from his body. At the same time, as if attracted by an incomparably strange power, the blood that flowed down from his wrist, the beads of blood and droplets of blood, suddenly drew out a thin line of blood that was as thin as a slippery thread. It gently floated up and silently swept past an inch or so from the ground, following Lu Chun's finger that seemed to be as heavy as 1,000 caddies as it floated forward. His finger paused, then suddenly pressed down. At the same time, the black flame in Lu Chun's eyes suddenly rose like a sudden wild flame. A muffled sound came from the ground, like the morning bell and evening drum in an ancient mountain temple, faintly reverberating. A spot of blood appeared on the ground. Then strands of blood, strangely twisting on the ground, began to spread out in many directions, forming one after another indescribable strange pattern. Lu Chun's hand slowly moved in the air. From the original one finger had become 5. The number of blood lines drawn from the blood increased. The strange pattern drawn on the ground also gradually began to take shape. It was a large triangular pattern. Within it there were countless hard-to-grasp twisting patterns, but the pattern formed by the blood, with the puddle in the tree hole as the center, completely wrapped around it. After an unknown amount of time, Lu Chun's hand slowly stopped. His face looked very pale, as if he had used up most of his strength. In front of him, there was a strange blood pattern that was almost complete. It looked like a strange formation, but when one looked at it from a distance, they would suddenly discover that the strange triangular pattern vaguely resembled a tree. The water in the puddle was still calm, without any ripples, as if it was not affected by the sudden appearance of the blood-colored pattern. However, for some reason, the cluster of strange black flames hidden in the depths of the water suddenly began to sway incessantly. A faintly discernible and hidden power seemed to be hidden in the still, quiet blood pattern, like a person's heartbeat in the middle of the night, indistinctly, inexplicably throbbing. The entire tree hole was in silence. The green gas, the tree walls, the two mysterious and unopenable doors all silently watched everything that happened here. Lu Chun looked at the pattern that appeared in front of him. His expression seemed somewhat tired, somewhat complicated, and a trace of inexplicable perplexity. But very quickly, his eyes lit up again. He bent over and picked up Atsu, slowly walked into the blood pattern, and knelt down beside the puddle. There were slight ripples on the water surface, reflecting his face. He silently looked at the figure in the water, and then gently put Atsu into the water. A few bubbles emerged from the water. The unconscious black dog swayed a few times in the water and slowly sank down. Beside the water, Lu Chun took a deep breath and suddenly slapped his palm backwards, not knowing which part of the strange blood pattern was hit, but there was a sudden sound like thunder above the clouds, and in an instant, the ancient tree whole shone brightly. On the ground that was smeared with blood, a strange bloody light suddenly rose up and turned into a bloody and strange bloody pillar of light that was reflected in the air. The light shadow twisted violently, accompanied by a howl, as if it came from the legendary yellow springs in the depths of hell. The blood shadow trembled and twisted, gradually turning into the shadow of a huge tree. It was a vague, faintly discernible tree, a towering tree, its head reaching the sky, its roots reaching the ground, a tree that existed everywhere across the three realms. Its whole body was blood red, as if every branch and every leaf was dripping with fresh blood. In that dreamy and terrifying illusion, countless drops of blood dripped from the terrible tree, as if hell was nothing more than this. Liu Chan took a deep look at the illusion. The corner of his eyes seemed to twitch slightly, but very quickly he regained his senses. His arm drew a strange pattern in the void and then slowly pressed down. Along with his action, a strange whistling sound rang out again. A strange light slowly flowed from the illusion, as if it had seeped into reality from the illusion. Bit by bit, it approached the puddle. The clear water suddenly jumped violently, as if it had felt an incomparably powerful force and received an unimaginable stimulation. The water waves trembled wildly, breaking all the calm, and at the same time, there was a rumbling sound coming from the depths of the puddle. The light in the blood shadow was still approaching, and it was about to touch the water. Liu Chen's face was as pale as paper at this time, but the black fire in his eyes burned more vigorously. The twisted flames even seemed to have a hint of wildness. Suddenly, the cluster of black fire in the depths of the water, as if it had been stimulated by something, suddenly flourished and directly expanded dozens of times from the bottom of the water, like a demon directly opened its terrible mouth and pounced upwards. Almost at the same time, the flowing light in the blood shadow touched the surface of the water. There was a sudden clap of thunder. Boom! All the water ripples suddenly shook violently. In the midst of the rumbling sounds, they burst apart together, bringing along Ah-Tu, who was in the water, and directly rose up into the air. Under the back of that strange blood shadow, everything seemed to be stained with a smear of blood. The light shone into Ah-Tu's body. The black fire caught up in the air, and the shadow instantly passed through Ah-Tu's body, and then swayed in the shadow, as if it was crazily swaying towards the blood-red tree, trying to penetrate it. But the next moment, all the shadows disappeared together. Hua-la-la-la-la. In the splashing water, Ah-Tu fell down together with the clear water and fell heavily back into the water. After a moment, an indescribable pain came from its mouth. It tossed and turned in the depths of the water, struggling to open its only eye slightly, and looked up. The water waves were still shaking violently, and in the chaotic light and shadow, there was a familiar face on the other side of the water waves, quietly looking at it. Although the face was pale, as if there was not a trace of blood. Ah-Tu slowly closed its eyes again, like a child sleeping peacefully. In the quiet night, darkness seemed to be everywhere, and the vast Kunlun was immersed in the night. In the depths of the fog, behind the blackboard, there was a bottomless abyss of darkness that passed through the long crust of the earth, like a huge temple in ancient times. In the vast passage, there was also a sense of loneliness. No one knew where the faint light came from, and it sprinkled in this lonely temple. In the distance, the huge and ancient door was hidden in the depths of the darkness, like a lonely guard that had stood for countless years. Time seemed to have frozen here, as if there would not be the slightest change for thousands of years. But at a certain moment, in the mysterious and ancient tree hole, the blood-red runes suddenly lit up, summoning the incomparably strange blood-red tree that passed through the three realms. There was a sudden change here. The quiet darkness suddenly trembled slightly. The huge stone door stood majestically. There was no sound, no movement, and it seemed to be dead silent. There seemed to be hesitation. In the dead silence of the darkness, behind the seemingly endless and deep door, a voice suddenly came from the back. It was like the roar of a dragon and the roar of a tiger, as if the wind and clouds were changing, as if something was sighing deeply. The darkness suddenly expanded, expanding like a heartbeat. The entire stone door trembled, and a few tiny pebbles fell from the high, almost invisible ceiling. The buzzing sound was like thunder, and it caused the earth to tremble. But after a moment, it suddenly became quiet again, as if it was still sleeping, and as if it was sleeping peacefully, it was finally sleeping peacefully. The darkness quietly retreated and returned to its original position. The stone door stood as straight as before, standing there silently. Time seemed to have frozen here once again, like a dream from which one would never wake up, struggling and suffering, never waking up. This night would eventually pass. Just like the countless nights in the past, the darkness would definitely pass, and the light would come. At dawn, when a morning light shone into the room through the window, a haggard Lu Chun sat on the ground. Atsu was wrapped in white cloth, like a dumpling, with only one eye, mouth, and nose exposed. Atsu lay quietly in Lu Chun's arms, eyes closed, sleeping quietly. Its chest rose and fell slightly, and occasionally its face seemed to twitch, as if it was dreaming of some terrible scene. But in the end, this black dog finally calmed down, as if all the horror and fear had gone away from its warm chest. Lu Chun leaned against the wall and looked at the ray of dawn in silence. He didn't say a word. This day he did not go out, nor did he go to the grass garden of Fragrance Garden. The Kunlun party was a place of rules, and of course, Bai Chao Tang was no exception. Fragrance Garden treated the handyman disciples better than Rockbend Mountain, but they would not indulge them at will. At least there was a daily roll call, although sometimes after the roll call, some people would leave early after finishing their work, but the rules were rules. Unless they asked for leave in advance, there would be trouble. Lu Chun ran into trouble. Jean Dan Friar Lin Sheng, who was newly appointed to take charge of the grass garden after the earthquake, was a strict person. So when he found out that Lu Chun had skipped work for a day without reason, he called Lu Chun over the next day. "What happened? Why didn't you come yesterday for no reason?" Lin Sheng looked coldly at the young man in front of him, who did not seem to be in a good mood. There was an inadvertent but matter-of-fact contempt in the depth of his eyes. He said, "Letting you cultivate spirit herbs here is the sect's trust and training in you. Don't you know that?" Lu Chun lowered his head slightly. After a moment, he said, "I was wrong. Do you have a reason?" A moment of carelessness during cultivation. My breath became chaotic, and my meridians flowed in the opposite direction. I suffered internal injuries. Lin Sheng glanced at him, and his eyes swept across his face. After a moment, he nodded and said, "Indeed, your internal breath is unstable, and there are signs of damage in your meridians. But you did not inform me in advance and did not come for no reason. That is wrong, and this reason cannot be defended. If your spirit herbs are damaged because of this, you will be expelled from Fragrance Garden immediately. Do you have any objections?" Lu Chun lowered his head and was silent for a long time. Then he said, "No, thank you for your magnanimity, uncle." Chapter 136. When he walked out of the house, Lu Chun's expression did not change. There was no anger, and no frustration. It was as if what Jean Dan Friar had said to him did not affect him at all. He just looked up at the sky. The sun was high in the sky, and the sky was blue with white clouds. It was a sunny day. He looked at it for a while, and then walked towards the herb garden. Along the way, there were people coming and going, some of whom were acquaintances. Some greeted him, and some nodded at him. But Lu Chun seemed to have something on his mind. He was silent all the way, as if he did not see anything. He walked all the way to the entrance of the herb garden. The mountain breeze blew, and the unique herbal fragrance of the herb garden wafted over. Lu Chun looked at the neat spiritual fields in front of him. He looked at them expressionlessly, and then walked forward. But the direction he walked was not towards his spiritual field. Right at this moment, a pleasantly surprised voice suddenly sounded from behind him. "Big Brother Lu, why do you look so pale?" Lu Chun stopped and turned around. He saw Xin running over from behind. She looked at him worriedly and whispered, "Brother Lu, are you okay?" Lu Chen looked down. After a while, he shook his head and said, "I'm fine." Xin still looked worried. "Brother Lu, do you want to go back and rest? I can help you apply for leave." Lu Chen was silent, and then said, "You better not go to Uncle Lin Sheng's place. He won't listen to you." Xin was a little surprised. "Forget it, I'll go with you first. It's not good to talk on the road." Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, and then looked at the people around him. Finally, he looked at a place in the distance, and then nodded. "Okay." "What?" Beside Lu Chen's spirit field, the two of them sat side by side on a ridge of the field. Xin looked a little annoyed and said indignantly, "How can Uncle Master Lin be like this? He clearly knows that something went wrong with your cultivation and hurt your body, but he still punishes you like this. Isn't this bullying?" Compared to when he first came to the herb garden, Lu Chen's expression seemed to be a lot better. When he saw Xian's annoyed look, he even smiled and comforted Xin. "Forget it, it was my fault." Xian bit her lip. "That won't do. Brother Lu, you are just a servant disciple. You don't have much income in Kunlun Mountain. Don't you count on the spirit herbs as rewards? Why did Martial Uncle Lin just casually say it, and you? Because he is Jean Dan Friar." Lu Chen smiled. Xian choked. For a moment, she was speechless. She didn't know what to say. After a while, she said gloomily, in any case, I just don't feel right." After a moment of silence, her eyes suddenly lit up, and she said to Lu Chen, "Big Brother Lu, why don't I secretly ask Martial Aunt Yin and have her speak on your behalf? Uncle Yin is very good to me. If I ask her, she will definitely agree." Lu Chen stared at her, a glimmer of light flashing in his eyes. Then he smiled and gently said, "No need. Your martial Uncle Yin is a well-known veteran gold core realm cultivator. That favor isn't light, so why waste it on such a trivial matter?" "But didn't I say it's okay?" Lu Chen smiled and patted the girl's head. "Why can't you remember what I said?" I told you not to hit my head." Xin rubbed her forehead. However, after hearing Lu Chen's words, she relaxed a bit. She took out a small bag from her pocket and handed it to Lu Chen. "For you, Brother Lu." Lu Chen took it and looked at it. "What is this?" "My family's tea." Xin smiled. "Didn't I mention it to you last time? Although this isn't our family's most famous tea, Little Crane, it's still a top-grade tea. It's not worse than most of the tea in Kunwa City shops." Lu Chen nodded. The hand holding the bag of tea slightly tightened. When he looked up, he saw the sunlight shining down on them. The girl sitting on the ridge of the field was smiling sweetly. She was as beautiful as a flower and as warm as the sun. Even though there was a faint red scar on her beautiful face that couldn't be erased, all the darkness and sadness seemed to quietly dissipate at this moment in her warm smile. "Brother Lu, are you really okay? You look a bit absent-minded. Do you feel uncomfortable?" Xin asked. Lu Chen smiled. "I'm fine." Xin said. "By the way, I haven't seen Atsu for a few days. How is it?" Lu Chen looked at her and said, "It's fine. It's the same as usual. I can't even see its shadow when it runs around all day." Xin pursed her lips and complained. "That's right. I want to look for it several times during the day, but I didn't see it even once. Brother Lu, it keeps wandering around in the forest all day. I'm always worried that something might happen to it." Lu Chen was silent for a while and said, "What you said makes sense." Xin suddenly became excited and said, "Yes, you didn't listen to me before. Today, you actually listened to me." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Don't worry. I've been quite busy recently. After this period, I'll keep it under control and won't let it run around. You can also come and see it often." Xin giggled and said, "Okay." Time was unknown in the mountains. Day and night could not be heard in the tree hole. In the ancient mottled tree hole, there seemed to be a kind of gentle light that always shone here. The water in the puddle on the ground seemed to be slightly murkier than before, but it was still clear enough to see the bottom of the water. On the ground around the puddle, the strange bloodlines had long disappeared. Now, there were only a few traces of blood left on the ground. There There was no one in the tree hole, but there was a dog. Black dog Atu's entire body was wrapped tightly in white cloth. It looked just like a white dog. It lay on the ground beside the puddle and slept for a long time. Then it opened its eyes. The only eye it had left. The gentle light shone into Atsu's eyes. At first, it was a little surprised, but soon it seemed to remember this familiar place and quickly calmed down. It turned its head and looked around. It found that Lu-chan was not here. This discovery made it a little worried, but soon it realized that it was the only dog here, so it calmed down again. During this time, its eyes occasionally swept across the water, and it suddenly froze. There was a strange thing reflected in the water, a monster that was tightly wrapped in white cloth, and only its mouth, nose, and one eye were exposed. Atsu shrank back subconsciously. Then, as if it had noticed something, it shook its head at the monster in the water. The monster in the water also tilted its head. Atsu suddenly seemed to be a little happier, as if it had found something fun. It began to shake its head at the water, and after a while, it stopped. It felt a little thirsty. It moved its body, approached the puddle, and stretched its head to drink the water. The water rippled, and the sweet water slid down its throat. Atsu felt a lot better. But at this moment, it suddenly saw a shadow in the water. In its eyes, a black flame slowly lit up, burning quietly. Bang! A sound came, and Lu-chan appeared in this tree hole. He patted his clothes, stood up, and walked behind Atsu. He looked at it and said with a little surprise, "Hey, you're awake?" Atsu, who was lying by the water, slowly turned its head and looked at Lu-chan with its only eye. In the deepest part of its pupils, in an unknown place, a little black flame was burning faintly. That night, when it was dark in the mountains of Kunlun, the moon was dark and the wind was strong. Soon, no one stayed outside. Lu-chan carried Atsu and walked quietly in the darkness of the night. It was as if he had merged with the surrounding shadows, and no one could detect him. After walking for a long time, Lu-chan stopped under a big tree. He first looked around, and then with one hand holding Atsu, who could not move, he easily climbed to the top of the tree trunk and hid in the dark. In his arms, Atsu looked around curiously, as if it didn't know why Lu-chan brought it here. Lu-chan didn't take any further action. He just sat on a branch with Atsu in his arms, and then whispered in its ear, "Don't bark. Wait here for a while." Atsu was a little confused. It looked at Lu-chan, but it still listened to Lu-chan's words and quietly nestled in his chest. On this chilly night, the man and the dog sat in the dense thicket and waited quietly. The night was getting darker, and the mountain wind was getting colder. The night in Kunlun seemed to be emotionless. It looked at the world coldly, and it looked at the vicissitudes of life. Lu-chan closed his eyes and waited in silence. From his angle, he could see the house in the distance through the gap between the branches and leaves. He didn't know when it was, but it was probably late at night. Finally, a figure came back from the distance. He walked quickly in the night and soon returned to the house. Halfway through, he suddenly stopped, as if he felt something. But when he turned his head and looked around, he didn't find anything. He frowned and finally walked back to his house. In the deep shade of the trees, in the darkness, Lu-chan lowered his head and whispered in Atsu's ear, "Don't bark." Atsu looked at him and then nodded. Only then did Lu-chan slowly let go of his palm that was covering Atsu's ear. He stared at Atsu, and then he saw Atsu's throat emit a harsh and fierce growl. Under the creepy scar, it opened its mouth, revealing snow-white and sharp fangs. "I know." Lu-chan looked at it and said faintly. Chapter 137. A green leaf rolled a few times from the old eaves tiles, then floated in the wind, swept across the alley, and slowly fell in the distance. In the deserted little shop, there was a pot of hot tea and 2 cups. Hot steam rose from the clear tea and floated in the air, exuding a unique fragrance. "How does it taste?" "This is a rare top-grade tea." Lu-chan asked Old Ma. Old Ma smacked his lips a few times, then said seriously, "I can't taste it. It feels similar to my crude tea." "Brute." Lu Chen glanced at him disdainfully and shook his head. He picked up the teacup in his hand and took another sip, saying, "Smell the aroma and taste the mellow aftertaste in your mouth. It's at least 10 times better than those lousy teas of yours." Old Ma grinned and said, "I still feel that my black tea is strong enough, comfortable to drink. This tea is too bland, there's no taste at all." Lu Chan waved his hand at him. It seemed that he had already given up on this fat man's taste. Old Ma laughed, kicked a package from the side, and put on the table, then said to Lu Chun, "These are the things you want, they're all bought. I say, why do you want these messy things for no reason? Those bones can barely be regarded as spiritual materials. But what do you want the cinnabar charm brush for? Do you want to draw talismans?" He stared at Lu Chun and said, "I don't remember you learning this skill." Lu Chen laughed in ridicule as he casually took the bag and placed it by his side, and then he said bluntly with disdain, "Let's not talk about whether I know talismans or not. Just based on my natural talent, I know everything I learn. How much do you know about me? Stop bragging." "Why do I feel that it's you who is bragging?" The alley outside the house was deep and quiet, and the fragrance of tea lingered in the house. Two people sat facing each other. "Last time you asked me to investigate the matter of those two women, there was some news recently." Old Ma lowered his voice and said to Lu Chun. Lu Chen's hand that was pouring tea paused for a moment before he said, "Go ahead. There's nothing unusual about Su Qing-jun, but that little girl from the Bai family seems a little strange." Lu Chan frowned slightly and didn't say anything. Speaking of which, these two people are really difficult to investigate. Right now, they are treasures in the eyes of the various families, and it is too late to guard them to the death. Fortunately, the two of them are very famous, so some stories and rumors still spread in private. Old Ma didn't immediately point out what was strange, but sighed first. "Rumor?" Lu Chen glanced at him and said, "Can that thing be trusted?" Old Ma shrugged and said, "There's no other way. These two girls are now closely watched by the two aristocratic families and the Kunlun party. If the investigation is a little too big, it will alert the enemy, so we can only take it slow. Do you want to hear these rumors? If not, then wait for a while and see what else I can find out." Lu Chun took a sip of tea and said, "Since we have nothing to do, let's hear it. Su Qing-jun has been the legitimate daughter of the eldest branch since she was young, and her talent was confirmed early on, so she has always been doted on by the Su family and is seen as a pearl in the palm. Every step she took was the best. She hired the best teachers to study and learn how to read. She cultivated the best and most suitable cultivation methods and divine arts. She was intelligent, knowledgeable, and well-mannered. On top of that, she was born with a beauty that would cause flowers to blush and the moon to block the moon. In any case, I have never seen such a perfect woman." Old Ma sighed and said with emotion, "I don't know which man in the future will have the good fortune to become a cultivation companion with such a woman." Lu Chan said, "I don't know about others, but I don't think you have any hope." Old Ma said angrily, "You talk too much. You make it sound like you have hope." Lu Chan laughed heartily, raised the teacup, and drained it in one gulp. Old Ma ignored him and continued, "Compared to Su Qing-jun, that girl White Lotus is a little strange. It is said that she is not the daughter of the main branch of the Bai family, but the child of a distant branch. 2 years ago, no one had even heard of her. It is as if a peerless genius suddenly appeared in the Bai family overnight." Lu Chen slowly put down the wine cup and looked at Old Ma. Old Ma was also looking at him. The two of them looked at each other for a moment. Lu Chen nodded and said, "It sounds like there is indeed something strange." Old Ma said, "I have carefully inquired about it, but all the information is from the past 2 years. When that girl was 8 or 9 years old, or even earlier, everything is blank. No one has mentioned her, and it seems that no one knows." Lu Chen's fingers gently rubbed on the table. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "But if there is a problem with White Lotus's background, the Kunlun party will definitely not allow her to be accepted by Hakushin Jinkun." Old Ma nodded and said, "Of course. What kind of status does Hakushin Jinkun have? His successor will definitely be thoroughly investigated by the Kunlun party." Lu Chan thought for a moment and said, During my days on Kunlun Mountain, I have heard rumors about Hakushin Jinkoin and the Bai family in private several times. Are they related? Old Ma immediately shook his head and said, I know that. There's indeed no relationship. Bai Chun is the Taoist name bestowed by Patriarch Tian Hong in the past. The word Bai should be a coincidence. Lu Chun tersely acknowledged his words and said, then continue investigating. Let's slow down on Su Qingjun for now. We have to investigate White Lotus in detail, especially her experiences before she came to the Bai family. It's best if we can dig it out. Old Ma glanced at him and said, did you discover something? Why are you so fixated on this 10-year-old girl? If there's anything wrong, you have to tell me. Lu Chun smiled and said with a calm expression, I just have a nagging feeling that she's a little strange. Old Ma shrugged and said, all right, I'll investigate slowly. Be careful on the mountain. The next day, sunlight shone down from the clear sky and shone on the flowing fragrance garden. In a hall outside the garden, Exian and Melaleuca japonica were together. As usual, Exian made tea for Melaleuca japonica and chatted with her to relieve her boredom. The fragrance of the tea wafted in the air. Melaleuca japonica picked up the teacup Exian handed her and took a sip. Then, her eyes narrowed slightly and she praised, good tea. Exian giggled on the side. She flipped her palm and poured herself a cup of tea. Melaleuca japonica lightly tapped the tea table and sighed. With a smile, she said, cultivating while drinking tea, the heart is as calm as water. I heard about this realm from my Sherzuin when I was young. It's only now that I vaguely have this feeling. Exian smiled and said, how is that possible? Shu, your cultivation is so high. You must have long surpassed the realm mentioned by Sherzuin. Melaleuca japonica glared at her and scolded, little girl, you're blindly flattering me. My Sherzuin's cultivation is as high as the heavens. She is the top Yuanying Jinren. How can I compare to her? Exian stuck out her tongue. Melaleuca japonica drank the tea in her hand and placed the cup on the tea tray. Exian came over and added another cup for her. At the same time, she said, Shu, it's been a while. Why hasn't there been any movement from my Sherzuin's side? Melaleuca japonica was silent for a moment. There seemed to be a trace of worry in her eyes. She said yes. Logically, she shouldn't have taken so long. Could it be that she has encountered a huge problem when she is breaking through the life and death barrier? Exian was shocked. She said, what? Then is my Sherzuin in danger? Melaleuca japonica said, the life and death barrier. If you pass it, you will survive. If you retreat, there will be great difficulties. Isn't that what it means? There will always be risks. Sigh. Exian was a little absent-minded. After a while, she sighed softly. Melaleuca japonica looked at her and couldn't help but caress her face. She said gently, it's okay. Although that old thing isn't very serious usually, her mouth is cheap and her life is tough. I think she won't die. Exian forced a smile and said, I know. I hope Sherzuin is blessed by heaven. Melaleuca japonica wanted to say something more. Suddenly, footsteps were heard outside the house. After a while, a clear and melodious voice came in. Is Shu Melaleuca japonica in? Disciple Su Qingjun is here to pay a visit. Melaleuca japonica and Exian were stunned. Then they sat down and said, I'm here. Come in. A faint red light flashed. Su Qingjun, who was wearing a beautiful scarlet feather shawl, walked in. She first bowed to Melaleuca japonica and smiled. Greetings, Shu Melaleuca japonica. Melaleuca japonica smiled. You are now Jindan Friar. No need to be so polite. Come and sit with us. Su Qingjun smiled warmly and said, Thank you, Uncle Master. She walked over as she spoke. Exian stood up and smiled at Su Qingjun. Sister Su, you are here. Su Qingjun nodded and smiled. Yes, I haven't seen Sister for a few days. You seem to have become more beautiful. Exian smiled. She poured a cup of tea and placed it in front of Su Qingjun. Sister, have some tea. Su Qingjun thanked her. After taking a sip, she said to Melaleuca japonica. Sure, Shu. I came here this time to thank you. Melaleuca japonica waved her hand. It's just a small matter. It's not worth mentioning. Su Qing-jun, however, said earnestly, the red amber pill isn't easy to refine. Not to mention the amount of spirit materials used, you've spent a lot of effort to refine a spirit pill for me and help me break through to the Golden Core realm. I'll never forget your kindness. Even my father specifically told me to show my gratitude to Martial Uncle respectfully. She took out a jade box from her side and presented it to Melaleuca japonica with both hands. This is a small token of my appreciation. I can't repay Shirshu's kindness. I hope Shirshu will accept it. Melaleuca japonica smiled. She looked at Su Qing-jun for a moment. Then, she took the jade box and sighed. Your father is really lucky to have such an outstanding daughter like you. I really pity you. Su Qing-jun lowered her head slightly. She blushed, looking as beautiful as a fairy. She was like a lily swaying in the wind. Shirshu is too kind. Yin Luo sized her up and said with a smile, your aura is calm and steady. Does this mean that your cultivation base has almost stabilized? Su Qing-jun said, almost. But recently, I still feel a little flustered and short of breath when I cultivate. My master has already told me to eat some eagle fruit. It should be able to get rid of it in about a month. Melaleuca japonica nodded. Yes, the eagle fruit is very beneficial to your dark moon arts. Your master is right. Su Qing-jun smiled. She stood up and said, that's why I came here this time to ask for your help. Chapter 138. Melaleuca japonica was a bit surprised and said, eagle fruit is precious, but it can still be found. You can find it in the Baichao Tang Medicine Hall on the mountain and in the many spiritual material shops in Kunwa City at the foot of the mountain. You don't need my help. Su Qing-jun smiled and seemed a bit embarrassed. She said, Martial Uncle, my master means that I like freshly picked eagle fruit the best. Melaleuca japonica was startled for a moment. She looked pensive and suddenly lowered her head to open the lid of the jade box in her hand. She took a look inside, and her expression changed slightly. Then, she became silent. After a moment, she sighed and said, it seems that Senior Martial Brother Miyuan really has great expectations for you. Su Qing-jun slightly bowed her head with a smile on her face. She didn't explain further and just said softly, I sincerely ask Martial Uncle to fulfill my wish. Qing-jun can't thank you enough. Melaleuca japonica closed the jade box in her hand. After thinking for a moment, she nodded and said, all right, I'll arrange this. You can go now. There will probably be news in a few days. I'll let you know when the time comes. Su Qing-jun bowed deeply to her and said with a respectful expression, thank you, Martial Uncle. Melaleuca japonica sighed and got up to avoid her. Then, she went forward to hold Su Qing-jun's hand and walked out with her. She said, Qing-jun, your future is promising and your achievements are limitless. You really don't need to be so polite to an old woman like me. I can't accept it. Su Qing-jun shook her head and said, Martial Uncle, what are you talking about? Melaleuca japonica smiled and waved her hand to stop her. She said, it's okay. We both know what to do. Anyway, I'll remember this. Just wait for my news. Su Qing-jun nodded and thanked Melaleuca japonica again. Then, she smiled and said goodbye to EXN, who came out behind Melaleuca japonica before leaving. Watching the beautiful woman's figure disappear at the end of the corridor, EXN couldn't help but show a trace of envy. She said to Melaleuca japonica, Martial Uncle, Sister Su is really amazing. Whether it's cultivation, talent, appearance, or bearing, she's perfect. Melaleuca japonica smiled and didn't say anything. Then, she turned and walked back to the room. EXIN followed up and asked curiously, all right, Martial Uncle, why did you have such a big reaction when Sister Su said she wanted fresh eagle fruit? Melaleuca japonica snorted and said, what do you know? There's a lot of knowledge in that sentence. EXIN was instantly interested. She pulled Melaleuca japonica's arm and said with a smile, Martial Uncle, tell me about it. Melaleuca Japonica rolled her eyes and said, "Make tea." "Okay, okay." Exin smiled and quickly poured the cold tea. Then she made a new cup of hot tea and placed it in front of Melaleuca Japonica. Then she said with a smile, "Martial uncle, teach me. Let me broaden my horizons." Melaleuca Japonica took a sip of tea and sighed. The eagle fruit has many uses. Although it's precious, it's not a particularly rare spiritual ingredient. It's nothing much. However, there's something special about this kind of spiritual fruit. When it ripens, it naturally emits a pure spiritual energy. When the petals open, the energy will spread out for about 10 minutes. If you eat the eagle fruit during this time, the effect will increase by 10%. 10%, EXIN said in surprise. "That's right, only 10%. Melaleuca Japonica said calmly, "because no one can pick the eagle fruit at the right time to eat it. All the eagle fruits on the market are picked and preserved. Since there's not much difference in effect, no one cares about it." EXIN looked outside the door and said, "Then why did Sister Sue, her Shifu, tell her to eat fresh fruits?" "That's what I was talking about." Melaleuca Japonica smiled and said, "Her Shifu, Masato Kahara, really has high expectations of her. She spares no effort in even these minor details. In this way, if there are no accidents, her foundation in the future will be almost perfect. At least in the Yuanying realm, maybe she'll have a little more confidence." EXIN was stunned for a moment. Then, she shook her head and sighed. Different people have different fates. Sister Sue is really lucky. Lucky. Melaleuca Japonica looked at her and smiled faintly, but didn't say anything. The light and shadow distorted in midair. After a while, Lu Chen's figure appeared in the tree hole. Atsu, who was lying on the ground and feeling bored, suddenly raised its head. It barked and limped over. At this moment, some of the white cloth on Atsu's body had been removed, but more than half of its body was still tied up. It looked a little miserable. However, Atsu's tenacious and amazing vitality was once again displayed at this moment. After receiving treatment from Lu Chun, such serious injuries began to rapidly improve. Now it could even walk with some difficulty. Lu Chun squatted down, hugged Atsu's head, and patted it. Then he first checked its various wounds, nodded, and took out a bag of meat and threw it to it. Atsu immediately barked with joy, wagged its tail, and then lowered its head to eat. Lu Chun sat down and patted its head. Then, he said, "You must be suffocated here. Bear with it a little longer. When your injuries are healed, you will be able to leave soon." Atsu raised its head and looked at him. It rubbed its head against his hand, and then lowered its head to continue eating the meat. However, after a few bites, it suddenly raised its head and stared at Lu Chun with its only eye. It let out a few low growls. Its sharp, snow-white fangs were revealed at the side of its mouth. Even its eyes seemed to be cold. It was just like those bloodthirsty and crazy black jackals on the Black Armor Mountain in the Land of Chaos. The ancient bestiality hidden in the depths of blood seemed to be emitting from this black dog bit by bit. Lu Chun looked at it quietly. After a while, he said faintly, "Don't worry. We will take revenge eventually." Atsu looked at him. After a while, it wagged its tail and then lowered its head to eat the meat again. Lu Chun sat at the side and watched it eat nonstop. He watched as the white cloth gradually recovered its vitality and its shiny black fur, as well as the aura of a wild beast that was gradually revealed. Lu Chun remained silent. It was another day when a morning light shone down. The fresh air turned into a gentle breeze, blowing over the top of the flowing fragrance garden. Most of the handyman disciples came here on time to work, so did Lu Chun. But this day was a little different from usual. Jean Dan Fryer, who was in charge of this area, came here with another female practitioner, Melaleuca Japonica, who had white hair and a ruddy complexion. They then picked 8 people according to the name list and told them not to plant their own spirit herbs for the time being. Together, they came to the other side of the garden to a relatively independent and wider spiritual field. There were many trees planted in this spiritual field, all of the same kind. Some had already borne fruit, and the fruits were different from the others. They were green with red, oddly shaped, and somewhat resembled an eagle's beak. Lin Sheng did not immediately lecture them. Instead, he had been standing on the side with Melaleuca japonica, whispering to them. The other 8 handyman disciples stood silently beside the spiritual field, many of them looking puzzled. Lu Chun was among the 8. Coincidentally, He Changsheng was also there. When he turned around to look at the people around him, he saw He Changsheng. He Changsheng seemed to be looking at him as well. For some reason, He Changsheng looked much better than before. He no longer had that flustered and exasperated look on his face, nor did he have that violent temper. He looked much gentler. He even smiled at Lu Chun and nodded at him when Lu Chun looked at him. But if one looked closely, one would vaguely find that there was a trace of strange doubt hidden in the depths of He Changsheng's eyes. He also seemed to be secretly watching Lu Chun, as if he wanted to see something from Lu Chun. But in contrast, Lu Chun did not seem to have anything strange at all. He had been standing there quietly. Occasionally, he would meet He Changsheng's eyes, and he would nod calmly and politely. He was neither angry nor close, just the same as usual. He Changsheng looked at Lu Chun for a long time, and the doubt in his eyes deepened. After a while, Lin Sheng ended his conversation with Melaleuca japonica. It seemed that he had a clear idea of what was going on. He stood up and began to speak to the 8 handyman disciples that he had gathered. The content of his speech was not too complicated. It was nothing more than a rare, 2-vein spiritual material, the eagle fruit, planted in this spiritual field. Because someone in the sect was in urgent need of this material, everyone was required to carefully cultivate it. If it was planted well, there would naturally be a reward, and the reward would be twice as much as usual. In addition to the usual harvest rewards, spiritual stones would be directly given to the person who planted the best. At this, the handyman disciples were all moved. In terms of rewards alone, this was unprecedented. And some people could also see that this time, the 8 people called over by Lin Sheng were almost the best in spiritual power cultivation among the handyman disciples in the herb garden. Obviously, this task assigned by the sect this time was for the one with the best results. With this tacit understanding and requirement, the 8 people quickly got into the mood and went down to the spiritual field. Lin Sheng nodded with satisfaction. He walked to the edge of the field and said to Melaleuca japonica, "Senior Sister Yin, what do you think?" Melaleuca japonica smiled and said, "Thank you for your help. It's a pity that this kind of thing could actually be done by the Foundation Establishment disciples. After all, the handyman disciples have low cultivation, and their control of the 5 elements of spiritual power is still lacking." Lin Sheng smiled and said, "Who said it wasn't? But as long as the official disciples have a bit of talent, they all see this kind of farming and mulberry planting as lowly and menial work. Even if they have nothing to do, they would definitely not come here to do this. Otherwise, if it was spread out, it would be a great humiliation. They would only feel that their status would be greatly lowered, and they would not do it even if they died. Sigh, I don't know how this trend started. What a pity." Melaleuca japonica was a little helpless and said, "That's true. Forget it. Anyway, now that it's like this, we can only pick the tall ones from the short ones. Let's choose the best one." Lin Sheng smiled and said, "That's the only way." Chapter 139. There is no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world, even in the Kunlun party, which had many rules. In fact, the Kunlun party had existed for too long, and the various big and small forces in the sect were intertwined, making it even harder to keep a secret. Perhaps in the beginning, it could be kept a secret for a while, but as time went on, more and more people knew about this matter, and the rumors would naturally spread. The eagle fruit cultivated this time was prepared for the hottest young genius in the Kunlun party, Su Qingjun. This news leaked out very quickly, and then among the odd-job disciples who participated in this competition, those who had a background, backing, or connections naturally knew about it, while those who didn't have a background remained in the dark. He Changsheng belonged to the kind of 3-no people who didn't have a background, backing, or connections, so he didn't know about this secret. However, he was an idiot. From the scale of this competition and the cautiousness of the two Jean Dan friar appearing at the same time, anyone would know that this matter was of great importance. He also saw that something was wrong from the expressions and movements of the other odd-job disciples, but no one would specifically come over to tell him anything. He Changsheng was very depressed and angry about this, but what he could do was to do his part as he had done in the past, and hope that through this competition there would be a chance for a carp to jump over the Dragon's Gate. Lu Chen's situation was actually similar to He Changsheng's. At least, he was an ordinary person with no background and backing, but he had a way out. At dusk that day, He Xian secretly ran to his residence and found him. She pulled him aside and whispered to him for a long time. In the end, she solemnly said to him, "Brother Lu, do you understand? You can't miss this opportunity." Lu Chun lay down on the bed, put his hands behind his head, and said with a smile, "You came running to me like this. Aren't you afraid that others will find out and punish you?" Xian snorted and said unconcernedly, "I'm not the only one. Those people from aristocratic families all had their superiors leak information to them. Besides, I heard from Marshall Aunt Melaleuca Japonica. She didn't specifically tell me not to say it, so it's fine for me to tell you." Lu Chun patted the bed and said, "All right, I know what to do. Sai, it's so nice to have someone in the imperial court. It's so easy to get things done." Xian's eyes narrowed as she smiled, but she quickly widened them again. She said to Lu Chun, "Brother Lu, don't be careless. Once you're chosen, you can go to Sister Su's side." Lu Chun was startled and said, "What do you mean?" Xian laughed and lowered her voice, saying, "Even the people outside don't know about this. Marshal Aunt Melaleuca Japonica only told me. It's good that you know, but don't let it slip." Lu Chun looked at her for a long time. He suddenly smiled and patted the edge of the bed, saying, "Little girl, you're amazing. Come and sit, let's talk." "Nonsense. There's still a lot of things you don't know about me." Xian laughed proudly, then said in a low voice, "Actually, in this competition to plant the eagle fruit, it's just to pick out the person with the best ling cultivation and then go to Sister Su's side because she wants to eat the fresh eagle fruit." She told Lu Chun about the eagle fruit in a low voice, and finally said, "In order to obtain the fresh and perfect eagle fruit, Marshal Aunt Melaleuca Japonica spent a lot of effort to transplant 7 eagle fruit trees from the flowing fragrance garden and directly plant them in the exclusive ling fields in Sister Su's cave. What's next is to have people watch over them day and night and carefully cultivate them. The date of bearing fruit is almost set. One tree will bear fruit every 3 days. When it bears fruit, people will be called immediately, and when it's ripe, it will be eaten without any delay. In this way, in 21 days, it will be a success. Sister Su's serene moon arts will no longer be obstructed, and she can cultivate all the way to the peak of the Jean Dan realm." Lu Chun fell silent after hearing this, and after a long while, he nodded and said, "So that's how it is." Xian said curiously, "Brother Lu, why does your complexion look so bad?" Lu Chun shook his head, smiled bitterly, and said, "It's nothing. It's just that after hearing you say this, I suddenly feel that on this path of cultivation, she and I are really worlds apart." Xian laughed out loud and covered her mouth as she laughed and said, "Look at what you're saying. There's definitely a world of difference between us. Not to mention that Sister Su's family is rich with countless wealth and goods. Even if it's natural talent, the difference is still too great. So, Sister Su is a genius. She was born with a good life and can't be forced. Look, I'm not jealous. I'm even happy for her." Lu Chun looked at her and smiled after a while and said, "You're right. Natural talent can't be forced." Xian nodded and then warned him, "In short, Brother Lu, you just have to know. If you can be chosen this time, not only will Sister Su owe you a favor, you might even have the chance to get closer to her. With this friendship, in the future in the Kunlun party, no one will dare to bully you." Lu Chun smiled and said, "All right, I understand." Xian stared at him and seemed to be even more nervous than when she was competing herself. She clenched her fists and said, "You must win." Lu Chun patted his chest and said, "It has to be me, don't worry." Exian laughed and seemed to have some trust in him and seemed to be full of confidence. The cultivation of the eagle fruit was not easy. This kind of spiritual fruit grew on the eagle fruit tree, and its trunk was slender, and its root system was developed. To adjust the spiritual energy of the 5 elements in the soil of the spiritual field was much more strenuous than normal spiritual grass, and it basically took a whole day. The odd job disciples who were chosen to participate in this competition were all very hardworking, but due to their limited cultivation, after a whole day of cultivation, they all looked pale and exhausted by dusk. When the sun set, everyone left. Different from the grass garden, even if the odd job disciples left, this special spiritual field was still guarded by Melaleuca japonica's people, in case of any accidents. When Changsheng left, he was quite satisfied, especially when he saw that there were people guarding the spiritual field, and he felt a lot more relieved. The disciples of the rich and powerful families were really evil, colluding with each other to suppress ordinary disciples like him. They were really evil. Fortunately, the Kunlun party was a righteous sect, and there were good people like Melaleuca japonica and Lin Sheng who were fair and just, so he did not enter this sect in vain. If he really had the opportunity to cultivate in the future, he would definitely thank these 2 benefactors. With this thought in mind, he walked back to his house. Unknowingly, the sky had already darkened, and the sun was setting in the west. It was going to be dark soon. Changsheng massaged his back and felt a little sore. Since he was an odd-job disciple, his talent was naturally not high, and his cultivation was also average. When he was working the grass garden, he did not really work hard for a whole day like today, and it was really tiring. But for the dream of the future, it was worth it. He was thinking about the beautiful future, and like every ordinary young man, he dreamed that one day he would stand out from the rest of the world, and his cultivation would be the best in Kunlun. By then, all the Yuaning Jinren, including the sect leader, would kneel at his feet, and countless beautiful female disciples, with Su Qingjun as the leader, would look at him with deep affection and softly ask to be his Taoist companion. These days were really too good. When he pushed open his door and walked in, there was a smile on the corner of his mouth, and he could not help but whistle. At this moment, a palm suddenly flew from behind the door and heavily chopped the back of his neck, and even faintly heard a low muffled sound. Changsheng's eyes rolled, and without even making a sound, he directly fell forward. Behind him, the door of the house slowly closed. The night was dark, and the mountain wind blew. The darkness was like a nightmare, always entangled him, and made Changsheng feel very painful. But inexplicably, in that darkness, he recalled the first half of his life. He once had a family. However, the biggest impression that his family had left on him was that the family had declined ever since he was young. From his grandfather's generation to his father's, it seemed that everyone was reminiscing about the glory of their ancestors, and then complaining and cursing at the reality in front of them, feeling indignant. But reality was reality. In the midst of complaining and cursing, the family still continued to decline uncontrollably. When he grew up, the He family was already destitute. He was very poor and dejected. Apart from the old house, he had nothing. However, he still remembered the obsession of his father and grandfather. He reminisced about the glory of the past that he had never seen. Gradually, he regarded restoring this glory as his duty. No one can stand in my way, and I will definitely restore the reputation of the family. I will succeed in my cultivation, become a spiritual master, and then rebuild the family business, marry a... No, what kind of identity is a spiritual master? Of course, I will marry a lot of wives, have a lot of children, and then buy countless wealth and goods. I will be better than the Su family, the Bai family, and the Lin family in Kunwa City. That beautiful scene seemed to be shining with golden light. He even laughed out loud in his dreams. Then he woke up. After waking up, he felt pain, as if his neck was being cut open. Then, when he turned his head with difficulty, he found that his hands and feet were tightly bound and thrown on the floor of the room, and there was an oil lamp on the table next to him. illuminating the room. There was another person in the room at the same time. "You're awake?" That person's back was facing him, but for some reason, he seemed to be able to sense that He Changsheng had woken up. But he didn't turn his head and just faintly spoke. That voice was low and slightly hoarse, and it sounded very unfamiliar. He Changsheng felt that he had never heard it before, but after a while, he inexplicably felt that it was somewhat familiar. He opened his eyes with difficulty and saw that the person's back was facing him. The person was holding a strange talisman brush in his hand, and he was drawing something on the white wall of his room. The traces drawn by the tip of the brush were as red as blood, and strange lines appeared on the white wall like the grin of a demon. Chapter 140. The strokes on the white wall were incomparably bright red, and looked very much like it was smeared with fresh blood. At the same time, because it was two full droplets of blood beads flowed down in a somewhat messy manner, leaving behind a number of thin blood stains, making one's hair stand on end just by looking at it. That person silently and patiently drew, as if what he was doing was a very important matter. But as the seal brush in his hand continuously waved, his voice once again came over. Most of the people in this world are very gullible. Many times, whatever other people say, they will believe it. For example, this reincarnation formation, for many years, many people in the world thought that it was incomparably evil, often killing people to take their blood and smearing it into the formation. In fact, it is not so exaggerated. That person raised his arm, drew a stroke, then turned his head to take a look and said, "Those who really need human blood, that is the supreme supernatural power of the evil sect, and killing people to take their blood is very troublesome. How can it be as comfortable as using cinnabar, right?" Under the candlelight, that person's face was wearing a black mask, covering his entire face, leaving only two dark and deep eye sockets. He Changsheng did not know why. Suddenly felt a burst of fear, cried out, "You! Who are you? What do you want to do?" That person laughed behind the mask. The laughter was hoarse. After a moment, he did not answer He Changsheng's question, only indifferently pointed to his side and said, "If your voice is a little louder, I will use it to cut off your tongue." He Changsheng's body trembled. With some difficulty, he turned his head to look. As expected, on the ground not far from his head, there was a black short sword stabbed into the ground. It looked extremely sharp, reflecting a chilling light in the candlelight. Other than that, he also saw that around his body, on the ground, there were a number of small and crooked holes, the thickness of a finger. He did not know what exactly it was used for. A chill enveloped his entire body. He Changsheng's face turned pale, for some reason. Although this mysterious person did not look like a fiend, the kind of indifferent tone instead made people even more terrified. He Changsheng saw that the masked person turned around again, continued to paint those strange formations on the wall. After a few deep breaths, he stammered, "You! Who are you? Where did I offend you?" That person did not respond. Quietly painted, blood-like marks spread out on the white wall, indistinctly like a bloody door was about to form. "Evil sect! Evil sect!" He Changsheng's panting became more and more urgent. Suddenly he urgently said, "This big brother, I did not provoke your evil sect. Let me go, let me go." The talisman brush was filled with cinnabar. It tapped on a spot on the white wall heavily, like a finishing touch. It seemed that the lifeless bloodstains suddenly had some aura. Then, between the bloodstains, a bloody door seemed to be open, as if evil ghosts would rush out from behind the bloody door in the next moment. That person turned around, put down the brush, and then walked to He Changsheng's side, looked down at him, then quietly said, "You did not provoke the evil sect, but you are useful to me." He glanced at that mysterious and twisted, horrifying blood door on the white wall, quietly laughed, and said, "I have searched for a long time and still could not find those companions, so I can only think of a way to let them come out themselves." He Changsheng did not understand the meaning of this person's words, but instinctively felt an indescribable fear. His teeth started to chatter. Chattering said, "You, what do you mean?" That person looked at him, squatted down beside him, but did not seem to have the intention to make a move. Instead looked at He Changsheng's face. After a while, from behind the mask came a sigh. After a long while, he was heard saying in a low voice, "Bullying the weak, fiendish, greedy for life when encountering a strong enemy, afraid of death. Everyone is like that. Standing in a light, modest and respectful, in the dark and scrupulous. Probably one day, no, it should be a long time ago, I may also become like that." That masked person faintly muttered to himself. A pair of dark eyes looked at He Changsheng, who was tightly bound and unable to move. His eyes did not seem to have the slightest emotion, other than a stretch of indifference. He Changsheng suddenly felt that he was like a pig waiting to be slaughtered. That ice-cold sense of despair seemed to turn up from every corner of his body, making him tremble incessantly. He desperately twisted his body, but it was useless. It only made him look like a twisted worm, unexpectedly ugly. At the same time, he once again begged this person, shedding tears, begging him to let him go, and then he was willing to pay any price. That masked person took a ball of cloth and directly gagged his mouth. He Changxing's mouth made muffled sounds. His eyes revealed despair and a trace of pain and regret. That masked person looked at him, suddenly smiled, and said, "Are you regretting that you didn't shout for help just now?" He Changxing stared at this person, his eyes like they were about to spit fire, as if he could not wait to cut this person into 1,000 pieces. But that masked person shook his head and then gently said, "I have already arranged a soundproof formation around this house. No matter how much you shout, no one will be able to hear. Saying like this, you will most likely be able to die in peace, right?" He Changxing's body suddenly stiffened. The despair in his eyes became more intense. And when he looked at this masked person again, the fear in his eyes also deepened. That masked person casually picked up the black dagger that was inserted into the ground, gently crossed it in front of him, and said, "Do you know, in the evil faction, there's an extremely terrible torture used to punish people who have committed a great sin. That torture is called blood dripping. Tie the sinner to the ground, cover his eyes, and then cut open his blood vessels bit by bit. This way, the sinner will hear drip, drip sounds slowly flowing out from his body, dripping to the ground. Then there will be countless terrible blood-devouring insects from the wounds on your body into your flesh, bit by bit, eating everything in your body. And you can even hear those chewing sounds. Isn't it very interesting?" The muscles on Yi Changxing's face violently trembled. His head desperately shook. His mouth as if he had gone crazy. Strange sounds. His face without the slightest trace of blood. The masked man looked at him, then reached out and took out a small cloth bag. He shook it in front of Yi Changxing's eyes. Suddenly, there was a sha-sha sound like sand rolling, but also like the sound of countless insects rubbing and biting each other. Yi Changxing's mouth cried out twice. His eyes stiffened, with indescribable fear staring at that small bag. After a moment, his lower body was wet. The masked person put down the bag, took out another item. It was an eye mask, and then slowly put it on Yi Changxing's face, quietly said, "Let's begin." Yi Changxing wailed, struggled with all his might, but right now like a fish on the chopping board. In the end, it was useless. Soon, his eyes were covered by a black blindfold, and he was completely drowned in darkness. An icy chill, like a merciless blade, fell on his right wrist. Yi Changxing's body instantly began to tremble violently, but the icy cold intent seemed to be indestructible. In an instant, it seeped into his flesh and blood and pressed down fiercely. Drip! Yi Changxing suddenly held his breath. Drip! The surroundings suddenly turned dark, a stretch of silence. Only that soft but clear sound, like a drop of water falling. Drip! The sound of every drop seemed to have the same interval. Every drop of water was like a terrible hammer, fiercely beating his soul. Every blow was enough to make one's soul fly away and scatter. However, the nightmare did not seem to be over. In that terrible and clear dripping sound, suddenly there was a thin sha-sha sound, like the sound of insects crawling, echoing in his ears. A frighteningly cold and numb feeling came from his wound. Yi Changxing could no longer bear it, let out a heart-wrenching roar, but all the sound, in the end, was blocked in the depths of his throat. The night wind was bleak, someone blew out the candles, darkness surged, plunging the world into a shadow. The masked person slowly stood up, coldly looking at the person in front of him, whose entire body was like sifting chaff, to the point that he did not even look like a human, put away the small bag in his hand, then turned and walked out. Behind him, in the small, twisted tunnels on the ground, bright red liquid was slowly dripping, making an orderly sound. When the door opened, there was a low squeak sound. Looking at the world outside the house, it was already late at night. He closed the door, walked to the dark side of the road, and sat down under the big tree. The dark shadow of the tree was hazy, covering his figure. After a moment, a black shadow walked out from behind the tree. It was a black dog, sniffing around and coming to his side. The masked person took off his mask. With the dim light, the outline of his face could be seen clearly. It was Lu Chun. He looked a little tired. Even the light in his eyes was a little dim. Atsu stood in the darkness, staring at him. After a while, it leaned over, gently rubbing its head against Lu Chen's arm. Lu Chen reached out and hugged it, gently touched Atsu's head, and whispered, "It's done." Atsu let out a low whimper, as if in response to his words. Lu Chun looked up at the dark night. A trace of complex emotions flashed through the depths of his eyes. After a moment, he picked up the small bag. Atsu's eyes stared at the small bag, unblinking. Lu Chun also looked at the small bag, looked for a while, and suddenly said to Atsu, "You see, I was right, right? There are so many people in this world. They believe whatever others say." He gently loosened his hand. The rope at the mouth of the bag fell. In the night wind, the sand inside was blown up by the wind, drifting into the quiet and cold depths of the night. Chapter 141. When a morning light shone, Lu Chun walked out of the door, yawning. Together with many other servant disciples, he walked towards the direction of the fragrance garden. Along the way, he met many fellow disciples he knew, and they greeted each other. One or two of them who were more familiar with him even joked with him. "Did you not sleep well last night?" "I didn't sleep enough. I work every day. I'm exhausted." Lu Chun shook his head and sighed. The servant disciples beside him all nodded. It seemed that everyone felt the same way. The various rules of the Kunlun party, such as squeezing the servant disciples and worshipping the talented ones, had long been an open secret. But no matter what, the Kunlun party was still a righteous sect, and it would still give the servant disciples a little hope. As long as one's luck and talent were all there was still a chance for them to make a name for themselves. The hope was small, but the beauty of immortality was enough to make people willing to fight for it. They chatted along the way, and when they reached the fragrance garden, the sun had already risen and shone on the vast herb garden. The wind that blew against their faces also brought with it the unique fragrance of the fragrance garden. Many servant disciples were like diligent bees, flying to their own spiritual fields. Lu Chun also walked among the crowd and came to the place where the eagle fruit tree was planted. When he stood on the ridge beside the spiritual field, he could not help but look up at the sky. The sky was bright, and the sun was bright. It was a good day. The rest of the people soon arrived, and after a while, Melaleuca Japonica and Lin Sheng, the two Jindan friar, also arrived. Just as everyone was about to start, Lin Sheng, who was calling the roll, suddenly frowned and said loudly, "Wait a minute, one person is missing." Everyone stopped in their tracks in shock and looked back. Melaleuca Japonica was also a little surprised and said, "Such a good opportunity. Is there still someone who doesn't know what's good for him? Who is it?" Lin Sheng looked at the list in his hand, and then looked at the servant disciples standing there, including Lu Chun and the others. After a moment of silence, he said to Melaleuca Japonica, "A disciple named He Changsheng is not here." Melaleuca Japonica snorted and said, "He doesn't know what's good for him. Forget it. Ignore him. We can't let so many people stand here and wait for him. Let's start." This was completely reasonable, and Lin Sheng had no objection. He immediately ordered everyone to go into the spiritual field to cultivate the eagle fruit tree. At the same time, he looked at the path they had come from, and a trace of displeasure flashed across his face. Yin Luo was the one who had called for this, but he was the one who had chosen these servant disciples. Now, that He Changsheng was absent for no reason, even though Yin Luo had no intention of blaming him. This situation was a slap to his face. Lin Sheng thought that when this guy came later, he would definitely give him a stern lecture. As for the one who was selected in the end, it seemed that he could not choose this guy. Lin Sheng thought so in his heart, but he did not show it on his face. He just turned around and looked at the busy disciples in the spiritual field. Lin Sheng's idea of giving He Changsheng a good scolding never came true, because He Changsheng did not come for the whole morning. By noon, Lin Sheng's face had begun to turn a little pale, and everyone except for Melaleuca japonica secretly distanced themselves from him. In the middle, Melaleuca japonica turned her head to look at him again, but she did not say anything. Arranging the management of the servant disciples was Lin Sheng's job. It was fine for her to say a few words, but if she interfered too much, it would be crossing the line. Another hour passed, and Lin Sheng finally could not stand it anymore. He called for a disciple on guard beside him and ordered him to find He Changsheng. At this moment, Lin Sheng had already made up his mind. If He Changsheng could not give a good reason when he came, he would deal with him on the spot and chase this audacious servant disciple out of Fragrance Garden. The disciple on guard received the order and left. The surrounding people, including the busy servant disciples in the spiritual field, were also secretly paying attention to this side. Some of them did not make a sound, but there were also a few who had smiles on their faces. It seemed that they were glad that they had one less opponent. The quiet mountain breeze blew through the herb garden, and the sunlight from the sky seemed to be gentle as well. After less than an hour, the commotion suddenly came from outside the grass garden. The noise seemed to come from afar, but because it was too far away, it could not be heard clearly. However, there seemed to be a few shrill screams mixed in, and then it quickly spread towards the flowing fragrance garden. At the edge of the spiritual field, Melaleuca japonica and Lin Sheng had the highest level of cultivation, so they were the first to notice a trace of abnormality. They turned to look at the same time, and not long after, they saw the disciple on guard rush over with a pale face. He suddenly threw himself in front of Lin Sheng, and then with a look of horror on his face, he stammered, "He's dead." What? The news of He Changsheng's sudden death spread in the blink of an eye in Fragrance Garden. At first, everyone was still surprised, but very quickly, many people felt that something was not quite right. The Kunlun party suddenly sent a lot of people to directly seal off the area, forbidding everyone from approaching He Changsheng's house. Lin Sheng and Melaleuca japonica were the first to arrive at the place, but they did not come out from the house. In the afternoon, the two Yuanying Jinren of Baichao Tang, Qin Deng, and Ming Zhu also rushed over and walked into the house with a solemn face. A little later, it was dusk, and under the countless watchful eyes, the head of Kunlun, Jinren Idle Month, also came over with a gloomy face. In the huge Kunlun party, it seemed that a storm was coming. All kinds of rumors spread wildly in the Kunlun party about what happened in the house, why the usually inconspicuous disciple suddenly died, and how it could attract the attention of so many powerful high-level Jinren. There were countless versions of answers to these questions. Some said that the disciple had been squeezed too much, and the pain was unbearable, and he felt that his future was hopeless, so he committed suicide in despair. Someone scoffed and sneered. What do you know? It's clear that the guy was bullied a few days ago, and he couldn't take it anymore, so he died. As for who bullied him, there were only a few bold and evil people in the Kunlun party today. Think about it yourself. Anyway, some people did things in a disgusting way, so be careful of retribution. Someone else said with certainty that the reason why it attracted the attention of so many Jinren was that the situation in the house was too tragic. The house was full of blood, and it was a horrible sight, like hell on earth. Someone next to him asked, "How can a person commit suicide to make the house and the ground covered in blood?" Then there was a bout of racking their brains to think about it. In the evening, the news gradually became clearer. There was indeed a murder in the house, and someone died, and the deceased was He Changsheng. He Changsheng died a very, very tragic death. But as for how tragic it was, none of the people who did not enter the house could tell. None of the people who entered the house wanted to speak. At most, they would say the word tragic with an ugly expression on their faces when they were cornered. When night fell, the Kunlun party had surrounded the house and the surrounding area of dozens of feet. The other disciples who lived in the surrounding area had all been carefully questioned, and after confirming that there were no suspicions, they were arranged to stay. As a result, the place that had been bustling yesterday was as deserted as a ghost town today. Lu Chun lived very far away, so he was not affected, and no one came to question him. So when it was dark, he stayed alone in his house, let Atsu lie on his lap, and began to help it untie the cloth. The blood-stained white cloth was thrown aside, revealing the hideous and ugly wounds. From time to time, Atsu's body would twitch in pain, but most of the time, it still endured the pain and lay there obediently. Some of the wounds were almost healed, so Lu Chun did not care anymore. He only replaced the most seriously injured parts. It seemed that less than half of Atsu's body was still wrapped in white cloth, and it seemed to be more pleasing to the eye than before. But it seemed to be a little uglier because now Atsu only had one eye and half a tail. When it stood, its limp was getting worse. Only the terrifying scars on its face seemed to add a little more murderous aura to it, making it look a lot fiercer. It's almost healed. Lu Chun looked at the black dog in front of him, then patted its head and said softly. Atsu responded to him and wagged its tail. Lu Chun looked at it and saw that half of its tail was wagging, which looked a little funny and weird. He could not help but sigh. Then he smiled and said, "When it's healed, you have to be careful when you go out to play." In Atsu's one eye, a dark green light flashed, and then it leaned its head on Lu Chun's knee, quietly snuggling up to him. And in a place that Lu Chun could not see, under the layer of dark green light, there was a very faint black, swaying a little. Lu Chun looked out of the window. The dark night was endless, and his expression was also indifferent. After a moment, he waved his hand, and the candlelight in the room dimmed. "Go to sleep. We'll see what happens tomorrow." The next day, it was still a good weather. The sun hung high in the sky. It was clear and cloudy. The sky was bright. The universe was bright. However, a shadow had already shrouded the Kunlun party. Updated news came out. It only said that a few Yuaning Jinren, led by Jinren Idol Month, were furious. The reason was in that house, He Changsheng, who died a horrible death, may have been killed by the people of the Devil Sect of the Three Realms. This was the first time in decades that the Devil Sect killed so brazenly in the Kunlun Mountains, and they showed their horses and carriages, directly revealing their identity. Of course, this was undoubtedly a painful slap in the face of the entire Kunlun sect. How could the idol Moon Immortal and the others not be incomparably furious? While he was dealing with He Changsheng's funeral affairs, he was also cursing the person in charge of the patrolling guards until his face was covered in dirt. When the head of the Heavenly Soldier Hall of the Kunlun party, Dukan Jinren, was summoned to Jinren Idol Month's place, he saw a few Jin Dan Friar, who were usually high and mighty, retreating with a pale face. Jinren Idol Month seemed to still be angry. His face was livid. He only nodded when he saw Dukan Jinren. Then he did not say any empty words. He directly asked Dukan Jinren, "Your disciple, how is he now?" Chapter 142. Only Taoist Master Xianyu and Taoist Master Dukong were left in the heavenly Kuan Peaks Xingyang Hall. There were no outsiders present. In addition, the two of them were very familiar with each other, so they spoke much more casually. However, Tao Master Dukong couldn't help but be startled when he heard Tao Master Xianyu's question. He replied, "He's still in closed-door meditation." "Senior brother Sect Master, you," Tao Master Xianyu sighed. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stretched out his hand and gestured for Tao Master Dukong to sit down with him. Then, he called for someone to serve hot tea. Tao Master Xianyu signaled the servant boy to withdraw from the main hall. Then, Tao Master Xianyu picked up the teacup and took a sip. Suddenly, He heard Dao Master Du Kong praise the tea. Then he cast a sidelong glance at him and said, "This tea is Little Crane." Du Conjurer nodded. As the Kunlun Party's Heavenly Soldier Hall's first seat for many years, he had seen all kinds of things. However, he smiled bitterly and sighed. "This Little Crane tea is indeed excellent, but I probably won't be able to get it from the Yi family in the future." As for why he couldn't get the famous Little Crane tea, Dukan Jinren did not say, but these two highly respected perfected ones naturally knew in their hearts. It must be because of the incident where he gang bullied the Yi family's young lady. Now that the Yi family and the Kunlun sect were like fire and water, they naturally couldn't get the tea. Dukan Jinren shook his head and stopped thinking about these stupid things. He turned to Perfected Idol Month and said seriously, "Senior brother, you call me here and suddenly asked about my disciple. What's the reason?" Perfected Idol Month nodded and pondered for a while. "There was a murder case at Fragrance Garden a few days ago. Did you hear about the death of a servant disciple?" Dukan Jinren nodded and said, "I've heard about it, but I haven't been there to take a look. I only know some rough information." "What wrong, senior brother?" Perfected Idol Month casually took out a scroll from her bosom and passed it to him. She said lightly, "It's about the situation in the house. Take a look for yourself." Dukan Jinren took it with some doubts. He first glanced at Perfected Idol Month, then lowered his head and began to flip through it. But as he read, his eyebrows frowned slightly. His expression became more and more solemn. For a moment, in the huge Zhengyang Hall, there was only the sound of him flipping pages. After a while, Dukan Jinren finished looking at everything. His face had already become somewhat unsightly. He said in a deep voice, "The evil cult is actually so insolent. They are really going too far." As he spoke, he seemed to have thought of something and looked at Perfected Idol Month. After hesitating for a while, he said, "Senior brother, such a thing happened, and you suddenly asked about he just now. Could it be that you want him to let him come to see me?" Perfected Idol Month stretched out her fingers and rubbed between her eyebrows. She said lightly, "I know you have high expectations of Yi, but his younger brother did indeed provoke public anger in the matter a few days ago. As the elder brother, he also did something wrong. It's inevitable to punish him." A trace of joy appeared on Dukan Jinren's face. He stood up and said, "Of course. In fact, if it wasn't for senior brother sect leader who came forward to mediate for me that day, Qianding and Mingzhu from Baichao Tang might not have been willing to let this matter go so easily. I have always been grateful for this." Perfected Idol Month nodded. She looked at Dukan Jinren with a trace of satisfaction in her eyes. She said, "It's good that you know what you're doing. After the battle in the Desolate Valley 10 years ago, the evil cult has been on the decline for many years. Very few people in the sect had contact with those evildoers. Only your disciple, He, met with an accident in the land of chaos a few years ago. He fought with the remnants of the evil cult several times. I heard that it was a few years?" 3 years. Dukan Jinren immediately replied, "That child is strong-willed and unyielding. Because his family members died in the hands of the evil cult's demons, he hated the evil cult to the core. Therefore, he fought with those evildoers in the land of chaos for a long time. After 3 years, both sides suffered heavy losses before he returned to the mountain. But in terms of understanding the situation of the evil cult in our sect, there's no one better than him." Perfected Idolmon smiled and said, "I also thought of this, so, of course, if you think that he is in closed-door cultivation and it will affect his progress, it's not good for me. Absolutely not." Dukan Jinren immediately opened his mouth and said resolutely and decisively, "Senior Martial Brother, I'm not an old fool. This is a chance that Senior Martial Brother is giving him, allowing him to come out of closed-door cultivation in advance. And the aristocratic families in Kunwa City can't say anything in front of the threat of the evil cult. We, master and disciple, will always remember this kindness in our hearts." Perfected Idolmon smiled and seemed to be a bit emotional. She said, "It's good that you know. All these years, there have always been people who are dissatisfied with my position as the sect head. They always say that when my master retired to the Winter Peak, The position of sect head should have been passed on to martial Uncle Tianlan. Alas, junior martial brothers like Qianding and Mingzhu also have ambiguous attitudes towards this. Only you, who have been in charge of the Heavenly Soldier Hall for many years, have always firmly stood on my side. Du Conjurin sneered and said, Senior Martial Brother, don't be angry. Who doesn't know what those people are thinking? They just want to take the opportunity to suppress us so that they can occupy more things on the strange peak in the sky. Ridiculous. What's more, when the position was passed on, we were all standing in this Zhengyang Hall. Even Martial Uncle Tianlan hasn't said anything yet. Since when did they have the right to complain? He cupped his hands and said seriously, Senior Martial Brother, don't worry. Those clowns definitely can't overturn the sky. Even if we take 10,000 steps back, Martial Uncle Baichun is still on the winter peak. I don't think they dare to act recklessly. I'll call He over to greet Senior Martial Brother now. If you have any instructions, just tell me. I'll ask that kid to do his best to help you catch this evildoer of the evil cult hiding in the dark. He definitely won't let Senior Martial Brother down. Immortal Idol Month nodded with a smile and said, That's good. Dukan Jinren turned around and left. He walked vigorously and was obviously very happy. For a person of his cultivation and temperament, this was also rare. However, from this, it could be seen that Dukan Jinren really liked his disciple He from the bottom of his heart and had deep expectations for him. Encountering this kind of thing, he seemed to be happier than encountering a happy event. Immortal Idol Month watched Dukan Jinren leave. He was the only one left in a huge Xingyang hall. He turned around and sat silently for a while. Suddenly, he sighed softly and his face showed some inexplicable tiredness. With his master, who was a perfected lord of Huashan sect, still alive, and he was sitting in the position of sect leader, those people still dared to make irresponsible remarks from time to time. Did they really have the guts? With just a few perfected masters in the Yuanying realm? Immortal Idol Month smiled bitterly, and his face gradually became heavy. He was afraid that those people had someone backing them up. In the fragrant garden, the competition to plant the eagle fruit tree was disrupted by this sudden murder. Not to mention the others, even the leader, Melaleuca japonica, and the two Jindan friar Lin Sheng had not returned for a few days. The remaining odd-job disciples looked at each other and did not know what to do. However, life still had to go on. In these days, when all kinds of rumors were spreading wildly, everyone still came to the spiritual field as usual. Although they did not know if the competition could continue, they still had to do their work. It was just that some people slacked, some worked more, and some seemed to be especially serious. This person who was especially diligent and serious was Lu Chun. Every day when it was time for him to work, he did not slack off and honestly did all the things that he had to do. When he was free, he would gather with the others on the ridge of the fields and discuss the ups and downs of the past few days in a lively manner. He talked about that unfortunate person who died a violent death, and together they imagined that if it was really the evil cult's doing, what kind of legendary evildoers would be like, and so on and so forth. Everyone did not have much opinion of the gentle and polite Lu Chun. Some even kindly reminded him not to waste his effort. Seeing that the two uncle masters Yan and Lin had not returned for a few days, this matter was probably going to be ruined. Even if it was not ruined, they would at least have to compete again when the time came. Otherwise, if they were not here for the past few days, who could tell if there was anything fishy? Lu Chun smiled and did not say anything. He nodded in agreement, but he still did what he had to do, and the others did not bother to criticize him. After another 2 days, Melaleuca japonica and Lin Sheng returned to the grass garden. It seemed that the sect had other arrangements for the two of them after hearing about the murder case. But even though they were back, Melaleuca japonica and Lin Sheng did not look too good, and they seemed to be in a bad mood. Then, as most people expected, they directly ignored the results of the few days of absence and announced to the crowd that the competition was invalid. They would organize another competition in a few days and then try to pick out a suitable candidate. In the crowd, Lu Chun was silent, but the people around him were all smiling. Occasionally, Some of Lu Chen's peers would come over to tease him, pat him on the shoulder, and then earnestly teach Lu Chen things like, if you don't listen to your elders, you will suffer. Lu Chen also smiled bitterly, and then nodded, saying that everyone was right, that he really did not understand this principle, and that he had to focus on his cultivation in the future. In short, this matter seemed to be over for the time being. However, one day later, there was a sudden change that no one expected. Melaleuca japonica and Lin Sheng once again gathered the crowd, and then, with a complicated expression, they announced to everyone that there would be no more competitions in the future. This time, the candidate had been selected to work for the most popular genius of the Kunlun party, Su Qingjun. The person who would grow the eagle fruit tree for her was called Lu Chen. The crowd was in an uproar, and when they looked over, even Lu Chen was dumbfounded, as if he did not know what was going on, and had a puzzled look on his face. The crowd surrounded the two Jindan friar and kept asking questions. And then Melaleuca japonica calmly said that it did not matter who said it, because it was Su Qingjun who had directly selected the candidate. The crowd was shocked and even more confused, and everyone kept talking at once. Melaleuca japonica, on the other hand, looked at Lu Chen from afar with a meaningful look in her eyes, and a playful smile appeared on her lips. Chapter 143. So what do I say? Are you going to thank me? After knocking on Lu Chen's door and walking in, Exan leaned against the table with a smug look on her face, giggling as she spoke to Lu Chen. Lu Chen nodded repeatedly and said with a straight face, "Of course, it's all thanks to Miss Yi's sharp eyes that I had this opportunity." Hee. Exan looked even happier. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and said proudly, "It can't be helped. I'm just so smart. That day, I ran into Sister Sue on the road. Although I only spoke a few words to her, I could tell from her words that she was very concerned about the eagle fruits. So I thought, if I don't care about other people's matters, how could she not care about herself? Since Marshal Aunt Yin and Marshal Aunt Lin aren't around, she'll definitely go and take a look herself, right?" Lu Chen nodded repeatedly, yes, as if he had suddenly seen the light. "You're really too smart, too quick-witted." Exan sighed, a pained expression on her face as she said, "It's a pity that the others all think they're so smart. Whenever there's a chance, they'll slack off. Sister Sue is secretly watching from the side, so of course she won't like it. So, looking at your diligent appearance and the fact that you've cultivated the eagle fruits well, it'd be strange if she didn't choose you." "So," she said to Lu Chen in a serious tone, "Brother Lu, in the future, you should remember this lesson. Don't be reckless, don't be lazy." Okay, I'll remember it all. Whatever you say is right." Lu Chen chuckled, as if no matter what Exan said, he would listen with infinite patience. So much so that Exan herself was a little embarrassed for bragging. She blushed and glared at him. "Whatever did I help you this time?" Exan asked. "You've been a great help," Lu Chen said. Exan stretched out her hand and said with a smile, "Then why don't you give me some benefits? Hand it over quickly. How about I devote myself to you?" "What?" Exan was startled. She blushed and said, "Hey, Brother Lu, you're not being serious again. What are you talking about?" Lu Chen laughed and waved his hand. "I'm just kidding. How can you joke around like this all the time? When we first met in the land of chaos, you even asked me to marry you. You're too shameless." Lu Chen laughed and said, "I asked you to repay me with your body, but you're not willing. If it's my turn to repay you with my body, you're still not willing. Wow, you're too difficult to talk to. Hey, can't you talk nicely, Brother Lu?" Exin looked like she was about to jump on the table in anger. Her face was red, and even her eyes were watery. Lu Chen shrugged and pulled her to sit down. Then, he said with a smile, Okay, let's not joke around. I'm more than 10 years older than you. I can't bully a little girl like you. Oh, but speaking of gifts, I really don't know what to give you." Exin suddenly raised her head and looked at him. Lu Chen didn't notice. He lowered his head and pondered for a moment. Then, he said, "How about this? I don't have anything good with me now. When you find a suitable husband in the future, on the day of your wedding, I'll give you the best gift, okay? On the day of my wedding? EXN still looked a little shy, but her eyes were bright and clear, like gentle water ripples, flickering with beautiful, ever-changing, sparkling glimmers as she asked softly. Luchin said with a smile, yes. EXIN looked at him for a while. Then, she suddenly giggled and said, okay, but you said it yourself. You must want the best thing, the best gift. Lu Chun stretched out his hand and said with a smile, gentleman's word. EXIN nodded her head heavily. She also extended her fair palm and clapped it on his palm. With a clear and melodious sound, she said loudly, it's a promise. Their palms touched for a moment. There seemed to be a trace of an unusual softness in their palms. Lu Chun withdrew his hand and walked to the side of the bed to sit down. As if he suddenly thought of something, he said to himself, let me think. I can't be considered a gentleman. Hey. EXIN jumped 8 feet high. She rushed over and pushed him down angrily. Lu Chun fell on the bed and laughed. EXIN found it funny and angry at the same time. She stretched out her hand and hit him a few times. She said angrily, you're too bad, too bad. You just made a promise and you want to renege on it. You're too bad. The sky was clear and bright, and the world was clear and bright. The majestic Kunlun mountain range stood on the earth. It was like a majestic giant. In its embrace, there were countless living beings. It also hid unknown darkness and shadows. When the warm sunlight fell on the house, everything looked so quiet and peaceful. There was almost no one around. Therefore, the sound of footsteps that broke the silence was unusually clear and loud. 2 people came. They were Dukan Jinren and his disciple. There were disciples guarding a place about 10 feet away from the house. However, after he handed over Immortal Idolmont's letter, they quickly stepped aside. Several gazes fell on He Yi's face. It seemed that they were more interested in this young man than the respected Dukan Jinren. He Yi's face was somewhat similar to his younger brother, He Gang. Of course, that was before He Gang's face was disfigured. They hadn't seen each other for many days. Perhaps it was because he had been in seclusion in the cave for a long time without seeing the sun. He Yi's face looked a little pale. However, other than that, he was full of spirit and energy. His expression was calm. It seemed that he had not been affected by that incident at all. When they walked to the door of the house, Dukan Jinren stopped. He Yi, who had been half a step behind him, also stopped. There was no one around. Dukan Jinren looked at his disciple. His eyes finally showed a trace of relief. He smiled and said, actually, when I agreed to sect leader senior brother's request, I was still a little worried for you. However, this opportunity was too rare for you. I could only snatch it first. He Yi's face showed a trace of gratitude. He lowered his head and said softly, Master's kindness is too great. It's really hard for this disciple to repay you. However, seeing you like this, I am also relieved. Dukan Jinren didn't care. He smiled and said, I was worried that the incident would be too big of a blow to you. It would affect your temperament and confuse your cultivation. Now it seems that not only have you not been affected, but you have also made progress. You should be only 1 step away from breaking through the Jindan realm, right? He smiled. His face was calm and determined. He didn't say anything. Dukan Jinren nodded and said, you are right. You have not achieved your potential yet. You should hide and endure. If you can use this setback as a sharpening, it will be very beneficial to your cultivation in the future. As he spoke, he seemed to think of something. He smiled faintly and said, now, everyone in the sect thinks that Su Qingjun is a genius. I don't think so. In the future, her achievements may not be able to surpass yours. Even with He Yi's calm temperament, he was shocked when he heard this. He said, Master, what do you mean? Su Qingjun has her own talent. She is indeed powerful. However, the reason why she can break through the Jindan realm so early is that the Su family and her master, Mu Yuan, have been sparing no effort to accumulate all kinds of spiritual materials and resources. This is also an important reason. The Su family hopes that there will be another Yuanying Jinren in their family. For this, they can do anything. As far as I know, Her master, Mu Yuan, has an even greater ambition than Yuanying Jinren. He's expression changed slightly. He said softly, "You mean Martial Uncle Mu Yuan wants junior sister Su to become a perfected cultivator?" "Of course." Dukan Jinren sneered and said, "Mu Yuan is the leader of the Iron Branch of our sect. He has long been dissatisfied with the decline of the Iron Branch for many years. However, with his ability, how can he shake the Kuanji? After all, there are two perfected cultivators by Chun and Tianlan in the Kuanji. Therefore, if the Iron Branch wants to prosper, the only hope is for a peerless genius to rise up and become a perfected cultivator in the divine transformation realm. In this way, there will naturally be a storm and a meteoric rise." He was silent. After a moment, he nodded and said, "Master is right. It's no wonder that Shirbua Kahara takes good care of junior sister Su. I heard that he is extremely demanding in his cultivation. He doesn't allow any mistakes and doesn't allow any regrets." At this point, he also smiled and said, "It must be hard for junior sister Su to cultivate under such heavy pressure and bravely advance all the way to where she is today." Dao Master Du Kong smiled mischievously. There was a look of disapproval on his face as he said, "It's still too early. Let's wait and watch the show." He paused for a moment, then looked at He and said, "In short, the path of cultivation is long and dangerous. You still have a long way to go. Xiao Yi, you have talent, but in the future, you must be able to calm your heart and cultivate in peace. Only then will you be able to achieve great things." He took a step back and bowed deeply to Dukan Jinren. He said in a low voice, "I will remember Master's teachings." Dukan Jinren nodded and said, "That's all. Just remember it. Let's go in." He said, "Yes." He stepped forward and prepared to push the door. Dukan Jinren said, "This matter is related to the evil faction. It is of great importance. Sect head Shi Xiang attaches great importance to it. You must investigate carefully and try to catch the murderer as soon as possible. Find out the truth." He said, "Yes, disciple understands." With a creaking sound, the two doors were pushed open by his hands. A gloomy aura gushed out from the room. It seemed that the light from the outside could not penetrate the room for a while, but a strange and unpleasant smell wafted out. He was about to walk in when he suddenly heard Dukan Jinren sneer behind him. He turned his head and said, "Master, what's wrong?" Dukan Jinren said, "Nothing. I just suddenly thought of something. I can't help but laugh at Mu Yuan's wishful thinking." "What is it?" Perfected Dukong said leisurely. "Mu Yuan has great ambitions. He did everything he could to help his disciple attain Golden Core, even earlier than the two perfected lords by Chun and Tianlan. Everyone in Kunlun thinks that he's a peerless genius, but he only cares about being happy. He did not think about whether the two powerful peerless Jinren of Kunlun are happy about their Tieji's method or not." With that, Dukan Jinren laughed alone. He stood at the side and looked at the house not far away. Looking at the deep darkness inside, he suddenly felt a chill in his heart for no reason. Chapter 144. The wind blew from afar, blew into this enclosed house, and then the sunlight shone down. Everything seemed to become gentle and warm, dispelling the darkness and coldness that was once hidden here. He and Dukan Jinren walked into the house. There was a strange aura in this room. It carried a lingering, fishy smell. Dao Master Dukong stopped at the doorstep for a moment. He frowned and waved his hand in front of him. "What's this smell? Why is it so strong?" In contrast, he did not have too obvious reaction. He quickly walked forward and opened the window. As the light shone in, the scene in the house was immediately revealed before their eyes. Bright red. This was the first shocking scene that they saw. The white walls of the house and the floor were covered in a blood-red color, as if countless people's blood had been splashed on them. It was a ghastly sight. Moreover, it seemed as if the blood of countless people had been deliberately painted on them, forming a complicated and incomprehensible pattern. He looked at the bloody patterns on the wall, his pupils slightly contracted, then turned his head, looked into the house bit by bit, and finally landed on the ground in the middle of the house. There was an empty space. Looking at the curved length, it seemed to be a human shape. He turned and glanced at Dukanjinren. Dukanjinren nodded and said he died there. He squatted down, looked at the finger-thick cracks on the ground. In the cracks, there were still many remnants of bright red, just that many places had already dried, looked like blackened blood stains. "How is it? Did you see anything?" Dukanjinren asked behind him. He looked somewhat solemn, frowned, and after a moment of silence, said, "The blood pattern formation in this house is called reincarnation formation. It is an extremely high-level formation in the evil sect. Ordinary disciples are unable to set it." His finger lightly brushed past the edge of a crack on the ground. It was unusually not rough, and at a glance, almost all the cracks, thicknesses, and sizes were exactly the same. One could imagine what a horrifying scene it would be if there were countless amounts of fresh blood flowing through these cracks. Let's not talk about the cultivation level of the person who set up this formation, but this technique is extremely authentic. He's voice sounded a little low, but his eyes were unusually bright and sharp, as if two balls of fire were burning in them. The array patterns, the positions, the angles, the spiritual energy, the 8 gates of life and death, the Tao of reincarnation, and all the important parts of the reincarnation array, he set them up perfectly. Dukanjinren walked to his side and said in a low voice, "You mean," he coldly said, "there's no way to fake this kind of formation. It must be the work of a core member of the evil cult. Moreover, his position must be extremely high. Only then can he have such a skillful and authentic method." Dukanjinren took a deep breath and said, "If that's the case, I will immediately go back and report this matter to sect head senior brother. Shaoi, I will leave this matter to you. I will also leave sect head senior brother's warrant with you. If necessary, you can deploy some of our Kunlun party's hidden resources. At the same time, with this warrant, no one below Jean Dan Fryer can refuse to answer your questions." "What if it is a Yuanying realm Shu or Sherbois?" he suddenly asked. Dukanjinren's expression changed slightly. He looked at He and said, "What do you mean by this?" He's expression did not change. He only said softly, "I just want to be safe, so I asked first." Dukanjinren seemed to be hesitant about this question. After pondering for a moment, he said, "Yuanying Jinren's side is indeed not easy to handle. But this matter involves the evil cult. The responsibility is huge. Let's do it this way. If you really need to ask any Yuanying Jinren, it's better to report to sect head senior brother first. Let him decide and summon them. Otherwise, your way of doing things is really too easy to offend people." He nodded and said, "Thank you, Master, for your understanding." Dukanjinren sighed. He took another look at the bloody scene in the room. He could not help but cursed in a low voice. He then turned around and left. He did not leave with his master. From this moment onwards, his biggest mission was to start tracking down that mysterious evil cult member. He slowly walked to the white wall. He carefully looked at those blood-colored patterns. He then leaned forward and sniffed. Then he used his hand to lightly rub on a red mark. It was indeed cinnabar. He's eyes revealed a look of understanding. But then a trace of deep worry flashed past. The evil cult had been on the decline for many years. He had not heard of such a person for a long time. Could it be that a demon from the evil cult who had been living in seclusion for many years had suddenly appeared? But if it was that kind of demon, why would he make a move on He Changsheng, such an unremarkable person who was not even an official disciple, and even set up such a terrifying reincarnation formation? Was it worth it? Was it not worth it? He stood in the room with his brows tightly furrowed. His gaze was as sharp as a sword. He slowly turned around and looked at the blood-red color that was almost everywhere around him. At a certain moment, he seemed to have a strange illusion. It was as if he was surrounded by a dense blood-red fog that surrounded him. And in the depths of the fog, there must be a huge secret. He slowly closed his eyes. Standing in this silent and lonely blood-red room, there seemed to be soundless waves around him, but he did not seem to feel it. He only softly muttered to himself, "Who are you? What do you want to do?" Lu Chun left the fragrance garden. Under the envious gaze of many people, he went to Su Qingjuan's cave abode. As the most prominent young genius of the Kunlun party, the newly promoted Jin Dan, and Su Qingjun, who had a strong background, naturally lived in an extraordinary place. It was on a Ziyun peak that was filled with spiritual power. Halfway up the mountain, there was a large cave abode that was opened up in the flying goose platform. Compared to the situation where the servant disciples lived in groups, there were only 4 caves on the entire Ziyun peak. And on the side of the flying goose platform, there was only Su Qingjuan's cave abode. Looking from afar, one could see the Immortals' chi rising and the clouds rolling down the cliff. Ancient trees and old vines could be seen everywhere. In the distance, there were cries of apes and birds nearby. It could be said to be an Immortals' paradise. It was the Immortals' cave abode that every cultivator in the world dreamed of. Standing on a flying goose platform, Lu Chun was also a little emotional and dazed. He did not speak for a long time. "Are you stunned?" A sweet voice came from his side. It was Xin. Lu Chun sighed and said, "Yes, this person is too different from other people." It was rare that Xin did not argue with him. Looking at the picturesque scenery in front of her, a look of envy appeared on her face. She said, "Indeed, when I came here for the first time, I was also stunned." As she spoke, Xin shrugged and said to Lu Chun, "Come, I'll bring you there." That day, Su Qingjun had something to do and was not in the cave abode. However, everything had already been discussed by everyone. Xin only brought Lu Chun here to familiarize himself with the way. When Su Qingjun returned later, she would naturally talk to Lu Chun. According to the previous arrangement, the person who cultivated fresh eagle fruits for Su Qingjun would follow Su Qingjun and live in her cave abode for a period of time. However, in reality, it wasn't quite accurate to say that they were in a cave abode. Generally speaking, the entire Soaring Goose Terrace was actually within the range of Su Qingjuan's cave abode. Walking on it meant that they were in her cave abode. However, the cave abode where Su Qingjun usually lived and cultivated referred to the wide stone cave that was opened on the side of the mountain wall of the flying goose platform. Usually, the cave door was closed and outsiders could not enter. The place where Lu Chun was going to stay was a mountain forest more than 100 feet away from the cave door. There was a spiritual field here, which was full of spiritual power and fertile land. Bai Chao Tang had also transplanted the 7 best eagle fruit trees here. In the following time, Lu Chen's task was to take care of these eagle fruit trees. Once the eagle fruit was found to be ripe, he must immediately inform Su Qingjun in the cave abode and let her eat it as soon as possible. Then, the medicine would circulate through all the meridians in her body without any loss. From then on, she would achieve the perfect Jin dance state. However, at this time, Lu Chun was frowning and staring blankly at the side of the spiritual field. It was obviously a newly built hut. "Am I going to live here?" he asked Xin. Xin glared at him and said angrily, "Isn't that nonsense? Do you really want to live in the cave abode over there?" Lu Chun shook his head and said with emotion, "Not really. But isn't it too shabby to prepare a hut for me? Hey, you're just a servant disciple. Don't talk as if you're already Jin Dan Friar, okay?" Lu Chun laughed and said, "You girl, your mouth is so poisonous. Be careful that no one will dare to want you in the future." "Bah, none of your business." Xin snorted and then walked over to open the door of the hut. She took a look inside and then turned back with a smile. "Brother Lu, it looks not bad." Lu Chun smiled and walked over. He stood in the hut and looked around. The hut was neither big nor small. There was a bed and a table inside. It could be considered simple and plain. "Anyway, I'll make do," he said with a smile. "I don't ask for too much for the workers." Xin laughed and walked to the door again. She said, "Brother Lu, your hut is more than 10 feet away from the door of Sister Sue's cave abode. When the eagle fruit ripens, will you make it in time to call her?" "I'll make it in time," Lu Chun said carelessly. "As long as it doesn't exceed 10 minutes, the primitive spiritual energy of the eagle fruit won't dissipate. It doesn't matter. Of course, unless she leaves here and isn't in the cave abode. If that's the case, I can't do anything no matter how capable I am. EXIN said with a smile. Don't worry about this. I heard from Marshal Uncle Yin that he has discussed it with Sister Sue. She will only do this during this period of time. Unless something big happens, she won't leave the cave abode. Lu Chen narrowed his eyes and then nodded with a smile. That's good. Chapter 145. Su Qingjun returned to the Flying Goose Terrace abode on Purple Cloud Peak in the afternoon. By this time, the Xian had already left. Lu Chun put down his luggage, tidied up the hut, and went to work in the spirit field outside the hut. The spirit field was about 2 acres in size. The 7 eagle fruit trees were transplanted here, spaced very loosely between each other. This was also to provide these precious spirit materials with sufficient spirit energy and nutrition. Lu Chun carefully looked at the eagle fruit trees one by one. After he had an idea, he chose a few trees that looked the most likely to bear fruit first and cultivated them. When he was tired, he sat down on the embankment to rest. Looking at the hut on the other side, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. He muttered to himself, after living in a hut for so long, I finally managed to live in a brick house, and now I'm living in a hut. I'm really regressing. What do you mean regressing? A clear and melodious voice came from behind him. Lu Chun turned around and saw Su Qingjun standing on the embankment not far away. She was looking at him. Lu Chun laughed and stood up. I was just joking. It's fine. Su Qingjun didn't laugh. Instead, she looked at Lu Chun seriously and said, Lu Chun, the eagle fruit tree is very important to my cultivation. I don't want anything to go wrong. Lu Chun was stunned. He seemed to have never expected that Su Qingjun would actually attach such importance to this matter, so he straightened his expression and said, Don't worry, Senior Sister Sue. I fought hard for this matter, so I naturally have to do a good job. I absolutely won't be perfunctory or overlook it. Su Qingjun nodded and said, That's good. After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something again. He hesitated for a moment, looked at Lu Chun and said, In addition, if you do this well for me, I will definitely reward you handsomely. Moreover, it will definitely be much better than the usual practice in Liuxiang Garden. In short, I will definitely not let you go back to where you were before. You can rest assured about this. A rare trace of embarrassment flashed across Lu Chen's face. He smiled bitterly and said, Then I thank you very much. Su Qingjun nodded to him, then turned around and walked towards the cave residence. But at this time, Lu Chun suddenly called out to her, saying, Shiji Su, I'm sure you know this eagle fruits character. I'll take good care of it, and once it's ripe, I'll call you. But since I want to do this well, I still have to discuss it with you face to face. During this period of time, you can't leave the cave at will. Su Qingjun nodded and said, Of course. I've left the mountain early recently to deal with some chores. For the next 20 days, I'll be staying in the cave residence to meditate. You can rest assured. Lu Chen grinned and said, Okay. Su Qingjun glanced at him, turned around with an indifferent expression, and walked towards the cave residence in the distance. And Lu Chun sat down again on the ridge of the field, looked at the spiritual field in front of him, and then looked at the blue sky above his head. Seeing the blue sky and white clouds, as clear as a wash, he couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He laughed softly and said, I made a name for myself in farming. If there's day, there's night, and if there's light, there's darkness. When Lu Chun stood under the clear and bright sky, sighing with emotion on the fairyland-like flying goose platform, feeling that there were still some bright and beautiful things in life. In another place in the Kunlun Mountains, he, who was walking on a mountain road, felt a trace of coldness in his heart. He always felt that the place in front of him was a little dark. The Kunlun Mountains were very large, and most of the places were bright and spacious. Just like the famous sect, the Kunlun Party, it was full of righteousness and awe-inspiring momentum. But such a large cultivation sect, of course, it was impossible for everything to be as it seemed on the surface. At least in the eyes of E, the mountain he was heading to at the moment, the place hidden in the shadows behind the mountain peak, was dark and cold. Even though it was daytime and the sun was hanging high in the sky, the feeling it gave people still hadn't changed. The mountain was Nameless Mountain. For many years, it didn't have a name. It seemed that no one was willing to waste their brains to give this damn place a name. So after a long time, Nameless Mountain actually became the official name of this mountain. Nameless Mountain was a small mountain hidden in the Kunlun Mountains. It was surrounded by tall mountain ridges, so most of the light was blocked by the high mountains. This small mountain was dark, cold, lonely, and cold. It had never been liked by people. In the shadow of Nameless Mountain, in an even darker corner, there was a house that looked like an ancestral hall. Righteous Grave. He looked at the house that seemed very dark even in the daytime, and slowly read the words on the plaque hanging above the door. A grave was a grave, a place to take in the corpses of the dead. But in the Kunlun Mountains, not all the cultivators of the Kunlun party would come here after they passed away. For cultivators with profound cultivation such as Jinjuan, Jinren, Jindan, and Foundation Establishment, the Kunlun party would naturally have a beautiful cemetery to bury them. They would enjoy the incense offerings of the younger generation day and night. During festivals, it would be incomparably lively. It was like a completely different world from the Righteous Grave. This dark and cold place took in some lonely and wild ghosts. It took in some people who couldn't enter the bright cemetery of the majestic Kunlun. He Changxing's corpse was placed here. Of course, it was reasonable to say that if they really wanted to investigate properly, this corpse should not have been moved. But even if the Kunlun party's methods were powerful, they still couldn't keep a corpse in a place where people gathered for a long time. In addition, He Changxing had lived his entire life in obscurity and died without a sound. Of course, he couldn't enter the Kunlun cemetery, so he could only be placed here in the Righteous Grave. The gate of the Righteous Grave was painted black. In this dark shadow of the mountain, it seemed particularly thick and heavy, but it also gave off a somewhat gloomy feeling. He stood outside the gate and gently exhaled. This was also his first time here. Normally, almost no disciple of the Kunlun party would be willing to come here. He walked forward and knocked twice on the gate of the Righteous Grave. His low and deep voice spread out, but behind the gate was silence. There was no response. He furrowed his brows and used all his strength to knock a few more times. This time, the sound was even louder than before. However, in this silence, the sound that suddenly sounded was like an abrupt howl that made people's hearts tremble. After a moment, the sound of footsteps came from behind the gate. It slowly approached and then opened the black gate. A thin and old face peeked out from the gap of the gate. For a moment, he couldn't clearly see how old this man was. However, what gave him the deepest impression was the eyes of this old man who guarded the Righteous Grave. There was almost no light in those eyes. There was only numbness and dullness, as if he had reached the final juncture of his life and was about to run out of oil. "What's the matter?" That pair of cold and numb eyes fell on He's face. Perhaps it was the gloomy atmosphere and dark aura behind him that made He subconsciously shiver. However, he was after all a cultivator with profound cultivation and outstanding talent. He quickly calmed down and then handed over a warrant from his bosom. "My name is He. Under the orders of the sect leader, I am here to inspect He Changxing's corpse that was delivered here a few days ago." This corpse watcher did not reach out to receive it. He only glanced down and then looked at He. After a moment of silence, he slowly pushed open the half door and said in a hoarse voice, "Come in." Seeing this corpse watcher move aside, he hesitated for a moment and then stepped into the Righteous Grave. The moment he stepped over the threshold, he seemed to have a feeling that the sky had suddenly turned darker. Most of the houses in this Righteous Grave were painted black. A row of more than 10 coffins were placed side by side under one of the walls of this courtyard. On the other side, there were many rooms in front and behind. Some of the rooms looked pitch black, while some of the rooms were lit up with specks of candlelight, emitting a faint light. As if he saw the doubt in He's eyes, the corpse watcher slowly walked past him and said in a low voice, "Those with candlelight are those who have just died. The road to the netherworld is long and hard to walk in the dark. There must be some light to make it easier to walk. He's expression changed slightly. He suddenly asked again, "What about those dark houses?" The corpse watcher turned his head somewhat woodenly and glanced at him. That pair of eyes seemed to have only a turbid haze and numbness. He said, "Those have been dead for a long time. Even their souls have gone far away." He stared at this corpse watcher, his pupils slightly contracted. Before today, he knew about this place called the Righteous Grave, but he had never been here before. Naturally, he would not know that this place was so gloomy and terrifying, and that there was such a ghastly corpse watcher. If he had not confirmed that he was indeed in the Kunlun Mountains, and this righteous grave was indeed the Kunlun Party's territory, he would have even thought that this person before him was some kind of evil demon. He even felt that those vicious and evil evildoers from the evil sect that he had met before, in terms of gloomy aura, they were not even comparable to this corpse watcher before him. However, since the Kunlun Party could allow this person to guard the righteous grave here, he should not really be some kind of demon. Perhaps this kind of place was really too rich in Yin energy. After staying here for a long time, it would naturally become strange. Thinking of this, he felt some sympathy for this corpse watcher. However, he had always been a strong-willed person. After he nodded to the corpse watcher, he said, "Where is he Changsheng's body placed?" The corpse watcher raised his hand and pointed to a certain place in the courtyard. He looked at his movement. Not only was it slow, it was also abnormally stiff. He did not know whether it was like a human or a ghost. He could not help but ask, "What happened to your hand?" The corpse watcher was silent for a moment and said, "It's fake." He was startled. He took a closer look and indeed found that although the corpse watcher's hand looked no different from a normal person's, it was actually carved from a wooden block. This made him a little embarrassed. He took a deep breath and bowed his head slightly. He said, "I'm sorry." The corpse watcher's expression changed a little. He seemed to be a little surprised. After he took another look at He, his stiff gaze seemed to have softened a little. Then his voice rang out again. He said, "In that room." He looked in the direction he was pointing. He saw a dark room at the end of the courtyard. There were a few flickering candlelight inside. He nodded and said, "Thank you for your guidance, sir." Having said that, he stepped towards that direction. However, he had only taken a few steps when he suddenly heard the corpse watcher behind him say, "Hey, do you want to know how that person died?" He's body shook violently. He suddenly turned around. His eyes shone brightly. Chapter 146. Nameless Mountain's shadow was heavy, as if even the sun hated this place, and there was rarely any time for light to shine down. In this dark courtyard, amidst the eerie atmosphere, the corpse watcher's sudden words made he feel incredulous all of a sudden. "You know," he stared at the withered, shriveled face and said in a low voice. The zombie widened his mouth and let out a chuckle that sounded like a chuckle. However, his face didn't seem to be smiling at all. Even when he chuckled, the muscles beside his mouth twitched a little, making him look extremely stiff. He even felt that a person who had just died would be more pleasing to the eye than this corpse watcher, because he looked more like a dead person than a dead person. The aura of death that was so thick that it could not be dispersed seemed to be emanating from his body at all times. After hearing He's question, the corpse watcher smiled strangely and said in a hoarse voice, "I have a condition." "What condition?" "I want to see someone. Find him for me." "Who is it?" "Dongfang Tao." "Dongfang Tao." He was stunned for a while before he suddenly reacted. "Oh, the one from Bai Chao Tang?" "That's right." He furrowed his brows and looked at the corpse watcher. "Why are you looking for him?" The corpse watcher was expressionless, looking like a lonely wild ghost standing in the dark courtyard. He said softly, "This has nothing to do with you." He was quiet for a moment, but then he shook his head and said, "I might not be able to do it. First, I'm not familiar with that Master Uncle Dongfang, and we haven't been friends in the past. Now, we might even become enemies. Secondly, according to what I know, he has been in closed-door training for a long time due to his severe injuries. Until now, There are no signs of him coming out. Even his favorite disciple could not formally acknowledge him as her master. So, I don't think I could do anything about it. The corpse turned around and said coldly, "Then forget it. I've said what I want to say. It's up to you whether you want to do it or not." He suddenly took a step forward. His eyes flashed as he said, "I have the sect leader's warrant in my hand. Is that not enough to make you speak the truth?" The corpse watcher did not turn around and said, "The warrant only allows you to enter this courtyard. If you want to suppress me, you're not qualified. Why don't you ask Reverend Idlemonth to come to me directly?" He was speechless. Of course, he could not really summon Reverend Idlemonth to this dark place. As the head of the Kunlun party, Reverend Idlemonth had many things to do every day. Moreover, this matter was handed to He by the old man. He did not want to be. He took a deep look at the corpse watcher and said, "Of course the sect master won't come here, but I promise you that sooner or later I will help you calm Marshal Uncle Dongfang. But whether it will succeed or not, I cannot guarantee." The corpse watcher did not seem to be moved. He waved his hand and said coldly, "Before I see Dongfang Tao, I have nothing to say to you." After saying that, he walked away on his own. Soon, he walked to the other side of the courtyard. In the darkness, he disappeared in the blink of an eye. He took a deep breath. His expression changed several times. In the end, he decided to put this sudden interlude aside. He turned around and walked into the dark room with flickering candlelight. The eagle fruit tree liked light and moisture. It also liked to be nourished by abundant spiritual energy. It was a very delicate spiritual plant. It was not easy to raise. Because of its special properties, it was not easy to pick. It could be said to be a very troublesome plant. Luchan came to the Flying Goose Terrace. Basically, he lived and ate at the side of the spiritual field. He took care of the eagle fruit tree here. It could be considered as adding firewood to Su Qingjuan's exciting and dazzling cultivation career. Unfortunately, the eagle fruit tree liked sunlight. It never ripened at night. This allowed Lu Chun to at least sleep peacefully at night. Otherwise, not even a deity would be able to bear it if he could not rest all day long. On the first day he came here, Su Qingjun came to the side of the spiritual field to talk to him. Then, she went back to her cave abode. He did not see her come out again that day. Lu Chen knew that Su Qingjun had a reputation for being obsessed with cultivation. Therefore, he was not surprised. He worked in the spiritual field until dusk. Then, he finished his work for the day. When the sun was about to set, Lu Chun walked to the edge of the cliff of the Flying Goose Terrace. He looked into the distance and saw a sea of clouds. The sun had mostly fallen below the horizon. The remaining light plated the clouds with a layer of golden color. It was like a brilliant golden ocean. It was extraordinarily beautiful. The mountain wind blew in his face, and his clothes fluttered. When he looked up at the sky from the cliff, he would feel a sense of relief. It was as if nothing in the world was important anymore. It was as if he was floating in the air. Perhaps this was the mentality of cultivation, or perhaps it was precisely because of this that the ancient deities and virtuous deities of the past countless generations liked to stay in the heavenly abodes of the famous mountains and great rivers, watching the changes of the white clouds and the changing of the stars, and thus comprehending the real great Tao. Lu Chen looked at the blue sky in the distance and was lost in thought. The path he walked seemed to be different from everyone else in the world. Even if he saw the scenery of heaven and earth and the sea of clouds, he still could not understand the Tao that belonged to him, the path that belonged to him. The next morning, Lu Chen woke up early and went to the spiritual field to take a look. After one night, the 7 eagle fruit trees did not look any different from the day before. Some of the fruits hanging on the branches were still green and did not show any signs of ripening. It should be a few more days. After Lu Chen looked at it, he had an idea in his heart. He took the wooden bucket to the spring in the mountains and fetched 2 large buckets of clear spring water. First, he watered them. Then he used his spiritual power to cultivate the trees. After this work, it was noon in the blink of an eye. He could finally take a breather. Lu Chen walked to the edge of the field and sat down. He glanced at the cave. This morning, Su Qingjun still did not come out of the cave. It seemed that this beautiful girl had made up her mind to stay in the cave and wait for Luchan to run over and call for her. Luchan smiled. He did not have any other grievances. After all, this was what they had agreed to do. He was sitting, calculating in his heart that at this moment in the Kunlun sect at the foot of the mountain, the news about He Changsheng should have already spread. Most of the ordinary disciples might just be watching the fun, but if there was really a spy from the devil cult, it would be impossible for them to be indifferent to the reincarnation formation. Perhaps there would be some reaction? He squinted his eyes and thought quietly. Then he looked up at the sky and decided that tonight, when it was quiet, maybe he should sneak down the mountain to take a look. Just as he was deep in thought, the quiet Fian platform suddenly heard a rush of footsteps from afar. Luchan was shocked. He turned his head and saw a man walking quickly up the mountain, heading straight for the door of the cave on the Fian platform. The spiritual field where Luchan was opened up at the side of the Fian platform. There were many ancient trees and rocks around it. Most of the area was hidden. In addition, the place was remote. If one did not look carefully, it would not be easy to notice this place. The man who came in a hurry obviously didn't notice that there was a spirit field 100 feet away from the cave residence. There was also a man standing there. Looking at his anxious expression, he ran to the gate and began to knock on the door. Bang, 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 bang. The knocking sound was deep and clear, but it wasn't too loud. This was because the door of Su Qingjuan's residence was different from the houses at the foot of the mountain. It wasn't a wooden door, but a stone door that had been enchanted with a spell. A golden core cultivator, or rather, a young genius that everyone looked up to, coupled with a wealthy family background, was just that different from the masses. Luchan touched his chest pocket. There was a yellow stone talisman there. Su Qingjun had given it to him when they met yesterday. Its function was very simple. He could use this stone talisman to easily contact Su Qingjun. In her words, the stone door was thick and heavy, but the cave inside was big and deep. If someone was really looking for it, it would not be easy to hear them just by knocking on the door. Seeing that the man used all his strength to knock on the stone door for a long time, but there seemed to be no response from inside the cave, Luchan suddenly became happy. He felt a strange sense of superiority that made him despise the man who was still foolishly knocking on the door. Although he knew that this feeling was very boring, he could not help but laugh. He did not have the idea of running over to help. On the contrary, he even took 2 steps back and sat down with his back against the trunk of an eagle fruit tree. He did not mind the dirt on the ground. After all, he had been rolling here for the whole morning. He watched from afar as the man became more and more distressed, and his smile became more and more joyful. Finally, the man who knocked on the door seemed to be unable to endure it any longer. He suddenly shouted, "Sister June, Sister Qingjun, are you inside? I am Su Biao." Luchan listened from afar. He pursed his lips and shook his head. Su Biao? This name is not good. Just call me Stupid Su. Su Biao waited outside for a long time, but the stone door still did not budge. Su Biao became even more anxious and paced around the cave entrance. It seemed that even his forehead was sweating. Suddenly, Su Biao seemed to have made up his mind. He knelt down in front of the cave entrance and kowtowed 3 times. Luchan, who was watching from afar, jumped in fright. He felt that things were getting more and more interesting. After a while, Su Biao pleaded loudly, "Sister June, please come out and see me. This little brother really has an urgent matter. I beg you to save me." "Eh? You want to save me?" Luchan looked over with interest. He touched the yellow stone talisman in his bosom, but after a moment of silence, he let go. "I want to see, when will she come out?" Before he could finish the last word, he suddenly heard the door of the cave on the other side rumble. The stone door moved open, and Su Biao, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly looked up, his face full of surprise. In the distance, Luchan was also startled. He subconsciously said, "He came out as soon as he heard help. It can't be such a coincidence, right?" Chapter 147. The stone door opened, and a beautiful figure walked out from behind the thick shadow. It was Su Qingjun. She looked at Su Biao, who was kneeling outside the cave residence, and a look of surprise flashed across her face. Su Biao, what are you doing? Sister Qingjun, save me. Su Biao rushed forward and reached out to hug Su Qingjun's leg. Lu Chen's spirits rose as he watched from a distance. He thought to himself, is there something strange going on between these two? He couldn't help but take 2 steps forward. Unexpectedly, Su Qingjun's figure flashed and avoided Su Biao's hug. At the same time, her expression darkened as she said, "Sixth brother, what are you doing?" Su Biao was startled and seemed to realize that he was a bit rash. He shook his head desperately and said, I was wrong. Sister June, don't be angry. I really have an urgent matter. Su Qingjun snorted and her expression softened. What's the matter? Say it. After a pause, she walked over and pulled him, saying, stand up and talk. You're a man, kneeling on the ground for no reason. What's the matter? Su Biao stood up. His face was full of urgency as he grabbed Su Qingjun's hand and said, Sister June, lend me 2,000 spiritual stones first. Su Qingjun's expression changed. So much. What do you want? Su Biao opened his mouth, but his expression suddenly became somewhat bashful. He couldn't explain the reason for a long time and only stammered, I need it urgently. Can you lend me the money first? Lu Chun was also interested in what he heard. He sat down on a ridge of the field and drank a spoonful of spring water from the bucket. This water was spring water from the mountains. It was sweet and delicious, making him feel like he was watching a show while drinking tea. At the same time, he said in a low voice, asking for 2,000 spiritual stones right off the bat. He really is from a grand family. So damn rich. On the other side, Su Qingjun asked for a long time, but Su Biao still refused to explain clearly. She seemed to be a little annoyed. She glared at him and said, If you have something to say, tell me clearly. Otherwise, why should I give you so much money? With a long face, Su Biao said, Elder Sister June, it's not like you don't know that our Su family has more than 100 disciples cultivating in the Kunlun party. However, more than half of our yearly offerings are given to you. If I don't ask for it from you, who else can I borrow it from? Su Qingjun's complexion changed slightly, but she immediately sighed, looking a little apologetic. On the other hand, Lu Chun gasped from afar and said, My God, this isn't just an ordinary kind of favoritism. After a while, Su Qingjun opened her mouth and said, Sixth brother, you better tell me the whole story. If you really need my help, I will help you. Su Biao hesitated for a moment, then moved his head closer and whispered a few words in front of Su Qingjun. This time, Lu Chun didn't hear the important part clearly. He couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. He scooped up a spoonful of water and drank it angrily. He thought to himself that it must be a shameful thing to be so careful in a place with no one around. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, he suddenly saw Su Qingjun raise her willowy eyebrows. Her face revealed a hint of anger, and she said angrily, What? You want to use this money to redeem that prostitute? Su Biao was so anxious that he stomped his feet. Just as he was about to beg, the two of them suddenly heard a violent coughing sound coming from a place about 100 feet away. Su Qingjun and Su Biao turned their heads at the same time. They saw Lu Chun holding his chest and coughing at the edge of the spiritual field that was mostly covered by ancient trees and rocks. It seemed that he had choked while drinking water, but it also seemed that he was struggling to not laugh out loud. His face was full of pain. Who is it? How dare you? Su Biao jumped 30 feet high, his face full of anger. He pointed at Lu Chun and shouted angrily, Where did this brat come from? How dare you hide on this flying goose platform? As he said this, his expression suddenly changed, and he shouted, You bastard, don't tell me you are so daring in your lust that you covet my sister June's beauty? Bah, watch me beat you to death today, then throw you down from this mountain. Lu Chun coughed and waved his hand. At the same time, he kept shaking his head. His expression looked a little strange. Su Biao was furious. Just as he was about to rush over and beat up this ignorant odd-job disciple, he was stopped by Su Qingjun from the side. She said, Enough. Su Biao stopped and turn around to look at her. He only heard Su Qing-jun say coldly, "He is an odd-job disciple from Bai Chao Tang. He is here to help me. He will be staying on this mountain for a while." Su Biao was startled. His expression suddenly became a little awkward. When he looked at the spiritual field again, he found that Lu Chun had actually disappeared in just a short while. He must have felt a little awkward when he saw this scene. He didn't want to embarrass Su Qing-jun, so he left first. Su Qing-jun also looked at the spiritual field. Her clear eyes didn't show much strangeness, but she also let out a faint sigh of relief. Su Biao, on the other hand, saw that there was no one around, so he ran back to Su Qing-jun's side. He begged desperately in a low voice and bowed with his hands folded in front. In the end, he even looked like he was about to kneel down. This scared Su Qing-jun so much that she pulled him back and scolded him harshly. However, Su Biao didn't care at all. He seemed to be very thick-skinned and kept pestering Su Qing-jun. Su Qing-jun scolded him and hit him. In the end, she seemed to be helpless. After being pestered by Su Biao for more than 2 hours, she finally waved her hand and stuffed something into his hand. Then, Su Biao ran away happily. From the window of the thatched hut, Lu Chun watched Su Biao's figure disappear like a wisp of smoke. He lay down on the bed and looked at the ceiling with both hands on the pillow. After a while, the smile on his face slowly disappeared. He seemed to have thought of something. He pondered silently and then sighed softly. "Why are you sighing?" Outside the thatched hut, Su Qingjuan's voice suddenly sounded. Lu Chun stood up and walked over to open the door. He saw her standing outside, a pair of bright eyes looking at Lu Chun. Lu Chun smiled and said, "How did you eavesdrop?" "I didn't eavesdrop," Su Qing-jun said. "I just wanted to come over and ask you something. But after reaching the Jindan realm, my ears are too sensitive. I can hear your voice from outside the hut." Lu Chun looked at her and smiled bitterly. He nodded and said, "All right." Su Qing-jun looked at him and said, "You saw everything just now?" Lu Chun hesitated for a moment and said, "I heard. Young Master Su didn't notice that I was here before, so I didn't restrain myself too much." Su Qing-jun frowned with some annoyance and then said, "Can you not tell others? Otherwise, this matter will not be good for Sixth Brother's reputation." Lu Chun nodded and said, "Of course, I will definitely not say half a word about this to others." "All right." Su Qing-jun seemed to believe him and then turned to leave. But her body had only turned halfway when she suddenly stopped. She looked at Lu Chun and said, "You coughed just now? Were you laughing at him?" Lu Chun immediately shook his head and said, "No, I just choked on water." Su Qing-jun stared at him. Lu Chun was speechless. He shrugged and said, "All right, I think it's a little funny. I didn't expect that a person like young Master Su of the Su family would actually like that kind of woman and even want to die for her." Su Qing-jun seemed to have the same feeling. She also shook her head slightly and sighed, saying, "You also feel that there is no true love to speak of for that kind of woman, right?" Lu Chun suddenly became silent and didn't speak for a long time. Su Qing-jun at first only sighed and didn't think too much about it. She planned to leave after saying that. Who knew that Lu Chun's reaction was a little strange? She couldn't help but look at him again and said, "What is it?" Lu Chun softly exhaled and said, "I think it's not completely like that." Su Qing-jun raised her eyebrows slightly and said, "What do you mean? Prostitutes are also people. Naturally, they also have 7 emotions and 6 desires. Although I don't dare to be sure, but I think maybe at some time, those women also have a little bit of sincerity towards someone." Su Qing-jun looked deeply at him. A strange expression flashed across her face and said, "I didn't think that you would actually think of those women like that." "Those women?" Lu Chun smiled and stood there, looking straight at Su Qingjuan's suddenly somewhat cold gaze. But he didn't retreat or shrink back. It seemed that Su Qing-jun didn't want to talk about this matter with Lu Chun anymore. She turned around and walked towards the cave residence. But after a few steps, she suddenly heard Lu Chun say behind her, "No matter what you think, and you indeed have the qualifications to look down on those prostitutes. But I still want to say, although those women are lowly, they really are also people. There will also be times when they will have sincerity." Su Qingjun didn't turn around, so Lu Chun couldn't see her expression at the moment, and he also didn't know if she would be angry at these somewhat presumptuous words at this moment. After a while, Su Qingjun opened her mouth. Her voice was calm and didn't seem to have much fluctuation. She only asked lightly, "Then have you seen that kind of woman's sincerity?" "I have seen it," Lu Chun said. Su Qingjun was silent for a moment, then said, "Very good." After that, she continued to walk forward. Lu Chun looked at her back, suddenly raised his voice, and said, "Also, although I believe that there will be sincerity in the prostitutes, that kind of thing is also very, very rare. Whether young Master Su has this kind of luck to meet such a woman with sincerity, I think it is very doubtful. And even if there is sincerity, whether or not it is in your brother, it is also difficult to say." Su Qingjun coldly snorted, finally stopped again, turned around, and looked a little unhappy. She stared at Lu Chun and said, "After talking for so long, what exactly do you want to say?" Lu Chun said, "What I mean is, it is very rare to meet such a kind of sincerity. Why don't you go and get those 2,000 spiritual stones back?" Su Qingjun looked at him. After a moment, she lightly said, "I won't." Lu Chun said, "Why is that?" Su Qingjun said, "I want to eat the eagle fruit, so I can't go down the mountain." Lu Chun said, "Oh, that's true, but it's a bit of a pity." Su Qingjun said, "It's nothing, just a little bit of money. Just think of it as feeding the dogs." Lu Chun. Chapter 148. As Lu Chun sat in the straw hut, he recalled the conversation he had with Su Qingjun and suddenly felt that Atsu was quite pitiful. If he really took out 2,000 spirit stones and threw it out, would there be people who would want to be dogs? Well, this was not a question that he could think about in detail. Lu Chun hurriedly cast this thought aside. Then, in the following time, he either went to the spiritual fields outside the hut to take care of the eagle fruit tree, or he casually walked around the area and looked at the beautiful scenery of the flying goose terrace. He watched the clouds and the sky as vast as the sea. He was prepared to wait like this until the sky turned dark, then find an opportunity to go down the mountain to see if there would be any unexpected gains from the trap he had set. But unexpectedly, this seemingly quiet flying goose terrace was unexpectedly visited by more people before dusk, and it was not just one person. There were two groups of 3 people in total. The first group was people that Lu Chun knew. They were Sumo and Su Qian, who had a conflict with Changsheng and the others in the fragrance garden. In view of the previous incident, although Su Qingjun did not show any particularly obvious dissatisfaction, Lu Chun still consciously hid in the straw hut further away. He could not hear the conversation over there, and could only see a little bit of the situation over there through the gap in the window. Similar to the scene when Su Biao came, Sumo and Su Qian also waited at the door for a long time. After about an hour, Su Qingjun finally came to open the door. This slow reaction made Lu Chun almost suspect that Su Qingjun had really reached the Jindan realm and had good hearing and sight. Or perhaps this woman's words and actions did not match, and she was actually trying to show her strength to these people. This is a little strange. Lu Chun leaned against the window and watched curiously. Even if they were family, Su Qingjun's place was completely different from what he'd imagined. She'd only focused on cultivation every day, but it was really different from what he'd imagined. After Su Qingjun came out, she still looked as cold and beautiful as ever. Sumo and Su Qian also seemed to be very respectful towards this big sister, and hurriedly bowed to her. Then, the 3 of them began to talk at the entrance of the cave. Seeing this, Lu Chun suddenly frowned and exclaimed. Something didn't seem right, including Su Biao in front of him. These people were all his blood brothers. Logically speaking, he should at least invite them into the cave abode to drink tea and talk quietly, right? But why were all of them just standing outside the cave? Looking at the expressions of Sumo and Su Qian, it seemed that they were used to this. It seemed that this was the rule of Su Qingjun's place. Lu Chun looked at the cave abode behind Su Qingjun from afar. He saw that behind the stone door was deep and unfathomable, and he basically couldn't see anything. The three of them talked for a while. Su Qian was slightly better, but Sumo had an excited expression on her face. She said many things to Su Qingjun, and in the middle, she gesticulated and begged for a while. Su Qingjun, on the other hand, frowned, nodded, and shook her head from time to time, and occasionally revealed a helpless expression. In the end, Su Qingjun finally waved her hand. She first said something to Su Qian, and then sternly reprimanded Sumo. However, the two of them had a happy expression on their faces and laughed out loud. After repeatedly thanking Su Qingjun, they quickly left. Su Qingjun turned around and returned to the cave abode. But not long after the stone door closed, Lu Chan was lying peacefully in the straw hut, waiting for the sky to turn dark. Suddenly, he heard movement outside. He was stunned for a moment and climbed up to take a look. He then muttered, "It can't be. Why is it so lively?" In just a short while, another person came up from the foot of the mountain. In a flash, he also ran to the entrance of Su Qingjun's cave abode. With a putong sound, he directly knelt down and then hugged the door, banging and shouting with all his might. Even Lu Chun, who was so far away, could hear a few indistinct words. "Elder sister Jun, elder sister, you must seek justice." Lu Chun, who was in the straw hut next to him, could clearly see that the third person who came was a girl. She was very young and looked to be 1 or 2 years younger than Su Qingjun. When she came, her footsteps were light and her expression was calm. Once she was near the entrance of the cave abode, she immediately revealed a sorrowful expression, and 2 streams of tears flowed down her face. What was even more strange was that after this girl knocked on the stone door for a while, she suddenly seemed to remember something. She suddenly reached out to her shoulder and grabbed the lapel of her clothes. She forcefully tore it and immediately tore a hole. Then she lay at the entrance of the cave and cried even louder. This time, because it wasn't too long since Sumo and Su Qian left, Su Qingjun came out much faster than before. After a while, she heard the rumbling sound of the stone door opening. As soon as Su Qingjun walked out, she saw the girl kneeling in front of her. Her clothes were disheveled, and her face was full of tears. She was instantly shocked and hurriedly went up to the girl. She used both hands to help the girl up and then asked repeatedly, her face revealing a worried and anxious expression. In the distance, Lu Chun couldn't help but laugh out loud. He looked at the straw hut with great interest. He shook his head and said to himself with a smile, "The people in the Su family are quite interesting." Because Lu Chun had gone to the Flying Goose Terrace to help Su Qingjun plant the eagle fruit tree, and he would be gone for at least 20 days, Black Dog became a problem. Lu Chun had originally asked people if he could bring Atsu to the Flying Goose Terrace, and those who were asked looked at him as if they were looking at an idiot. How could a fairy-like person like Su Qingjun be together with a dog? Lu Chun was also speechless. Later, he asked around for a while and found that the situation might be true. Girls from aristocratic families like Su Qingjun and Exian had basically never had much contact with pets since they were young, so it was hard to say whether they would like Atsu from the bottom of their hearts like Exian did. It would be too troublesome if more problems arose because of this. Anyway, they would only be staying for 20 days, so after Lu Chun thought about it, Black Dog began a lonely life as a dog. Every day it would run out on its own, take care of its own food, drink, and defecate. When it was dark, it would run back on its own, crawl into the house through the small dog hole, and sleep. Exian did think of it, so she specially ran over to see Atu. When they met, Exian was shocked. Seeing Atu's miserable appearance, she couldn't bear to look at it. She immediately burst into tears. But compared to Exian's sadness, Atsu seemed to be much stronger. It looked indifferent all day long, even though it only had 1 eye and half a tail, and there were many terrible wounds on its body. But these wounds seemed to be unable to stop Atsu's yearning for the mountains and forests, even if Exian begged. For a long time, except for Lu Chun, Atsu had almost never been close to humans. Exian was an exception, and she could talk to a little bit. But every time Exin wanted to take Atsu away, Atsu firmly refused. It seemed it would rather go back to that cold and lonely house every night and sleep alone, but also seemed to have incomparable patience, quietly waiting for Lu Chen's return. Unconsciously, this black dog's life and Lu Chen's seemed to have become intertwined, and it was unwilling to be separated. The setting sun shone on Kunwa City. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on a secluded courtyard. This was an unremarkable place in Kunwa City. It had been bought a long time ago, and then it was left alone for a long time. It wasn't until a few days ago that someone suddenly moved in. Since the day the new owner moved in, he had been living in seclusion, almost never going out. The neighbors hadn't seen him for such a long time, nor had anyone come to visit him. The courtyard's gate was so lonely and quiet, as if it wasn't a person living inside, but a soul of nothingness. Until one day, a man suddenly came here, walked into this secluded courtyard, and forcibly pulled the person hiding in the dark outside, letting the rays of the setting sun shine on his body. In the light of the setting sun, that person let out strange roars and sounds of resentment. His entire face was hideous and ugly, like torn rotten meat, and he looked more like a ghost than a human. He forcefully threw his younger brother to the ground. A trace of pain and regret flashed in the depths of his eyes, but his face was filled with extreme anger. He even raised his foot and ruthlessly kicked He-Gang a few times. He-Gang rolled on the ground, screaming a few times, but he didn't dare to resist in the slightest. Or perhaps it was because he had long lost hope in himself. In front of his only elder brother in the world, he was like a wailing wild dog, shedding painful tears. "What are you crying for?" He suddenly let out a low roar, grabbed He-Gang's shirt by the chest, lifted him up, and directly slapped his face. He-Gang was slapped until the corner of his mouth was bleeding, but he still didn't make a sound. Looking at He-E in the eyes, there seemed to be only numbness left. "Just beat me to death, big brother." He looked at his handsome, perfect, and his only elder brother in the world, and said bitterly, I only brought shame to you, and even caused you to be insulted and punished. In the end, you were even driven out of the Kunlun party like a dog. Big brother, don't worry about me. Let me die. He's face was livid, and he slapped He-Gang again, causing him to roll on the ground. Then he grabbed him back, and his eyes seemed to be emitting fire. He glared at him and shouted, "Look at yourself. What have you become now? If you were my brother, I would really want to kill you with one slap." He-Gang smiled bitterly. "If my death can free you, can let you be valued and cultivated by the sect again, then what's the harm in my death?" Tears kept flowing down from the corner of his eyes, and he choked. "I have a rotten life. It's fine if I end up like this today, but big brother, you clearly have a great future, but I have implicated you. He snorted coldly, but the gaze in the depths of his eyes finally softened. He walked to the side of the stone steps and sat down, then sneered, "Why do you think I was able to come out of seclusion and then come down the mountain to find you?" He-Gang was stunned, and then his eyes slowly lit up with a glimmer of light. Chapter 149. His hideous face suddenly trembled. He glared at He-E and said, "Big brother, could it be that you?" He nodded slowly, then looked at He-Gang and said, "The heavens have taken pity on me. I suddenly have a rare opportunity to escape from my current predicament. However, I need you to help me." He-Gang suddenly sat up with excitement in his eyes. He said, "That's great, but..." His expression suddenly dimmed as he said, "But how can I help you in my current state?" Before he could finish speaking, he had already interrupted him, and then said in a resolute tone, "You are my only brother in this world, and I only trust you." He-Gang's body trembled. He stared at He-E in a daze. Gradually, his hideous face seemed to brighten up. Even his gaze became somewhat gentle. He clenched his teeth and knelt in front of He-E. He said, "Big brother, if there's anything you want me to do, I'll do it even if I have to risk my life." He glanced at him with a gratified expression in his eyes. He then shook his head and said, "You don't have to risk your life, but you have to pay attention to hiding your tracks. For example, when you go out, change your clothes, wear a mask, or something like that. Don't let anyone recognize you." As he spoke, he took out a package from behind him and threw it to He Gang. He said, "I prepared everything inside for you. After you go back, dress up a bit and go to all the big shops in the city." He Gang caught the package. Suddenly, his eyes flashed and revealed a bit of fierceness. He said, "Big brother, are there still people on the mountain watching you?" He sneered and said, "There are many people watching us. They can't wait for me to do something wrong and fall. There's no need to pay attention to them. However, I can't allow anyone to disturb me with what I want to do. It's a bit inconvenient for me to go out myself, so I need you to help me. Rest assured, big brother, I'll definitely do a good job. However, you wanted to go to all the big shops in Kanwa City because..." He took out a small paper bag from his pocket and handed it to He Gang. He Gang received it with some doubt. He first glanced at He, then opened the folded paper. There was some scarlet powder in the center of the paper bag. He looked at it carefully, then brought it to his nose and sniffed it. Then he said in surprise, "Cinnabar? Yes, you will pretend to be a wealthy customer and then ask around to find out which shops have been in the city recently and who has bought this thing in large quantities." He Gang nodded, put away the paper bag, and said, "I understand." He smiled faintly and stood up. He raised his head and looked at the setting sun in the distance. His gaze was deep. A moment later, he suddenly laughed coldly and said, "The reincarnation formation needs a lot of cinnabar." Due to the Haida rain, the setting sun on Kunlun Mountain actually stayed in sight longer than it did in Kanwa City. Flying Goose Terrace on Zion Peak was a good place to admire the setting sun. The sea of clouds was magnificent, and the afterglow illuminated the sky. The beautiful scenery was enchanting. However, at dusk, no one on Flying Goose Terrace was in the mood to admire the setting sun. The woman who ran to Flying Goose Terrace seemed to be a member of the Su family. At least, Su Qing-jun seemed to be very familiar with her. During the tearful complaint, the woman seemed to be saying something to Su Qing-jun. It seemed like she was complaining, but it also seemed like she was reprimanding someone. In the end, her eyes were filled with tears. Su Qing-jun's attitude towards this woman was different from how she treated Su Biao, Sumo, Su Qian, and the others. She was obviously more sympathetic. But later, when the woman seemed to make a request to Su Qing-jun revealed an awkward expression. Lu Chun watched this scene with interest. He recalled the woman's light footsteps and calm expression when she went up the mountain. It formed a sharp contrast with her current appearance of begging, with tears streaming down her face. The two women seemed to be in a deadlock. Su Qing-jun sighed and said a few words to the woman, pointing at the spiritual fields on this side. Although Lu Chun couldn't hear what she said, he could clearly guess that Su Qing-jun was defending him for the eagle fruits. She was referring to him not being able to go down the mountain. Who would have thought that after the woman heard this, she would cry even harder? She even hugged Su Qing-jun's waist and rubbed her head against her, looking like she was about to die. Su Qing-jun's face immediately revealed an awkward expression. She softly advised the woman for a while, but it seemed to be useless. In the end, she seemed to be forced into a corner and shook her head with a bitter smile. She softly said a few words to the woman. The woman's face suddenly revealed a happy expression. She suddenly stood up, as if her wish had finally been fulfilled. After hugging Su Qing-jun tightly, she immediately walked down the mountain. She walked hurriedly and quickly, as if she was afraid that Su Qing-jun would call her back and regret her decision. Su Qing-jun silently watched the woman's figure gradually disappear into the distance. Her face also revealed a faint trace of helplessness. In the distance, in the thatched hut, Lu Chun withdrew his gaze and lay down on the bed. He began to close his eyes and rest. The light outside the hut gradually dimmed. It was probably the time for the sun to finally set. Night was coming. It was also at this time that a burst of light footsteps suddenly came from outside the thatched hut, passing by the side of the hut. At this moment, there were only two people on the Flying Goose Terrace. Other than Lu Chun, there was also Su Qingjun. The sky was already dark. Why didn't she return to the cave residence? Why did she come here? Lu Chen sat up and looked outside the hut. He slightly frowned. After a moment of silence, he opened the door of the thatched hut and walked out. The night was about to turn dark. The setting sun in the distance was only left with a golden edge, as if it was still longing for the last bit of light in this world. On the edge of the cliff of the Flying Goose Terrace, there were layers upon layers of black shadows. It was as if the shadows came from all directions. On top of the rocks, Su Qingjun stood alone. The mountain wind blew past, and her clothes fluttered in the wind. She was like a thin leaf that could be blown away by the wind at any time. She was also like a small pine tree planted on the edge of the cliff. No matter how the wind, knives, frost, swords, and time attacked her under the night sky, she had a feeling that she had weathered the frost and was still fresh in the face of snow. Her figure, like a whisper in the night, was so beautiful that it did not seem like the quiet time of the human world. And looking into the distance, was there some sadness in her eyes? Lu Chan slowly walked over, but when he was about 10 feet away from the figure of the woman, he suddenly stopped. After looking carefully for a while, he turned around again, looking like he wanted to walk back to the thatched hut. "Why don't you come over?" Su Qingjun's calm voice came from behind. Even though she did not turn around, she seemed to be able to clearly feel what was happening behind her. Lu Chen stopped and looked at her. He saw that Su Qingjun still had the same appearance as before. What he saw was only a beautiful and deep back. "Well, actually, I was a little worried that you would take things too hard and want to jump down," Lu Chen said very calmly. "But now it seems that everything is fine. I was thinking too much, so I plan to go back to sleep now." Su Qingjun's figure moved slightly, and then she turned around to look at Lu Chen. The expression on her face looked a little strange. She said, "You think I want to jump down?" Lu Chen did not seem to be embarrassed at all. He said seriously, "I think the wrong way. I am sorry." Hearing these words, Su Qingjun shook her head and was silent for a moment. Suddenly, she said, "Everyone who came today is from our Su family. You also saw them, right?" Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "I saw them all. But at the beginning, because Su Biao was close, he had a rough idea of what was going on. I was at the thatch hut after that, so I didn't hear anything. I don't know what happened." Su Qingjun nodded slightly. Looking at Lu Chen, her gaze softened a little. After a moment, she said, "You can take the initiative to avoid it and save me some embarrassment. Thank you." Lu Chen looked up and down at Su Qingjun. He thought that this woman was really different from others. Not to mention her beautiful appearance, her exquisite mind was even more clever. She could hear 3 things from one thing. There was a trace of admiration in his eyes. Then he said, "It is late at night. Shiji Su, be careful. The wind here is cold and dew is heavy. Take care of yourself. I will go back first. The scenery here is very good." Su Qingjun seemed not to hear Lu Chen's words. She said to herself, "The sea of clouds billows like a vast ocean. It is a rare, beautiful scenery. In the night, it is a different scene than in the day. Don't you want to see it?" Lu Chen stopped and looked at Su Qingjun. He suddenly smiled. He did not decline, nor did he show any humility. He just nodded and said, "Thank you." Then he walked up the cliff. Below the cliff was steep. As soon as he walked up, he felt the mountain wind suddenly become much fiercer. The whistling sound was endless, as if it came from the 9 heavens and swept down to the earth. Thick clouds were under his feet. They were vast and boundless, reaching into the depths of the blue dome of heaven. Smoke and dust rose and fell like waves. Where the wind and clouds were, the world was vast. When he looked back, he saw a bright moon rising slowly. It was late at night. He stood by her side. When they stood side by side, their clothes fluttered like messy waves. The feeling of the strong wind brushing against their faces, as if there was a pair of wings under their ribs. Su Qingjun turned around and glanced at him. Her expression was calm, devoid of joy or sorrow. Lu Chen didn't even look at her. His eyes were fixed on the distant sea of clouds, watching the faint moonlight illuminate the vast sea of clouds. It was a magnificent and wondrous scene. He couldn't help but exclaim in admiration, "It really is a beautiful scene." Su Qing-jun smiled slightly. She was as beautiful as a lily in the night. Then she also turned to look. The two of them looked at the sea of clouds under the moonlight. They stood together for a long time, until the moon was in the middle of the sky. Su Qing-jun looked away. After a moment, she suddenly said, "I want to go down the mountain tonight." Lu Chun looked into the distance. There was no expression on his face. He said lightly, "It is not worth it." And that you're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.